September 13th, and we're at the Betaravia Government Center. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Valero, could we have the TV coverage announcement, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. TV coverage announcement: Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County Santa Barbara Television, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcasts of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. And now for the roll call. Commissioner Boyson?
Here.
Commissioner Brown?
Here.
Commissioner Cooney?
Here.
Commissioner Spicer?
Here.
Commissioner Valencia?
Here. Thank you. And now the agenda status report. Ms. Black?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, good morning. I believe we are set to move forward with all of the items on the agenda this morning, or today. You have North Point Unit 3, Phase 4 as your first item, and then several items that are ordinance amendments that are being presented by staff, including the SMARA ordinance amendments that will be presented by Larry Apple, and two winery-related permit issues that will be presented by Mr. Langle, and he is going to make those presentations through remote testimony.
Right.
And then finally, we've got the general plan annual report being presented by John McGinnis as your last item of the day.
All right, thank you. And with that, could we go on to the, too many papers here.
Projection report?
Could we go on to the projection report?
Yes. Mr. Chair and members of the Commission, we have a special hearing scheduled for your Planning Commission next Tuesday. That meeting will occur in Santa Maria in this hearing room. And as you can see, it's quite a full day. There is an item on that day that the Commission's been requesting for some time, and that is the Environmental Health Services briefing. And at your meeting last week, you requested that somebody from the Regional Water Quality Control Board be present at that meeting, and that will be possible. You also requested that the water districts and water purveyors that are located in or around special problems areas be noticed of the discussion item, and I took care of that and sent out notices yesterday. So hopefully everybody will receive them. There is one issue that I think we should discuss today, and that is when that item ought to come up on your agenda. Right now it's shown as the last item on the agenda. We can certainly keep it there, but if we do, the person who's most knowledgeable about these issues of concern at the Regional Water Quality Control Board won't be available. Somebody will be, but not the person who's most knowledgeable. He's available until 2 o'clock. So your commission may, excuse me, may choose to take that item up either as your last item in the morning or your first item after lunch, or we can leave it at the end of the day.
Let's stop right there. Let's ask the Commission. To me, it's pretty important that we have the most important person here, and we like to do the people's business first. However, this is an exception to the rule, and I think we could have it in the beginning. Is that all right with everybody in the Commission? All right, why don't we...
So do you want to have it as the first item of the day?
Yes, let's get that out of the way in the...
Okay, then we'll just adjust the agenda
All
next
right.
week as
Thank you,
as
Ms. Meester.
indicated. The next hearing your commission has is on September 27th, and that meeting will be in Santa Barbara. There's one item that's shown on that agenda that will actually be continued to October 25th, and that is the Hedrick appeal. October 4th is your next meeting, and it's also scheduled for Santa Barbara and is closed. You have quite a few items on that day. Then October 11th, we'll be back in Santa Maria again, and that agenda is also closed. And then your next meeting is October 25th. There's some availability on that agenda as well as on November 1st, and then you continue on through the year. One item I wanted to talk to your commission about, because you raised it last week, was whether or not we were planning on having a meeting the week of Thanksgiving. Traditionally, we don't have a meeting that week. And so I wanted to see what the commissioners thought about that. I do think it is a difficult day for members of the public to commit to being here. So it's something to consider. And we usually run about half staff on that day as well, because people are trying to travel to get places. We do have a special hearing scheduled tentatively for the 5th Wednesday of November, which is November 29th, that week after. And there's certainly time on that day to schedule additional items if need be. So that my suggestion would be to keep November 22nd as a day that you will not have a hearing, and if items need to be heard, that we put them on November 29th.
We have a question, Commissioner Smyser.
I'm sorry, that was just open. That was a mistake on my part.
Commissioner Boyson.
Yeah, no, I was just going to make a comment on that. I mean, if we're asking preferences, my preference would be no meeting on that day. That just seems to be a very busy day right around that holiday.
I think it's just a hard day for people, for the public to come in as well. So if not hearing anything differently, I think we'll continue to keep November 22nd as a date that the commission will not meet, and then we'll monitor the agendas and put items on November 29th if we need additional time
Okay.
for the commission's work. Then your holiday lunch, and I know it's only September, but at the end of the year seems like it's coming quickly, is scheduled for December 6th. And that will be in Santa Barbara, and we're not quite sure where we're going to have that, but we'll figure that out in the next few months.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, we'll move on to public comment. Is there anybody here who would like to speak on anything that's not on today's agenda? Mr. Field, would you please come forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, my name is Bob Field. I live in Santa Ynez. Please excuse the Hollywood sunglass look here. I poked myself in the eye with a tree, and you'd rather not see it. I will be fine. I want to submit, and I've already passed these out for distribution, a memo in response to Commissioner's Boyson request at a prior meeting about some written information regarding the AAC and its organization and those issues. So I have provided those. On the way up, I realized I did not provide a third layer here. The first page is a summary and conclusion. There's a couple of pages of analysis that led me to the first page. What's missing is the third layer, which is the source documents, the primary documents, and I will get those to the subcommittee. I don't want to join the unsubstantiated assertions crowd, so I'll get that to the subcommittee. I'm not sure it's worth getting those documents to that entire distribution list, but of course you can redistribute them if you wish. I don't want to take much of your time here at all, but just in summary of what I see the problems here. It's on the front page. I believe that the organization for developing recommendations for ag lands is essentially designed to fail. When it was moved from comp planning into a specific department, I think it lost the balance and the full view that's required for success. Further, I think the problem is compounded by a faulty composition of the Ag Advisory Committee for this purpose. I think it's a terrific committee, but when it comes to being the primary body for ag lands recommendations, it does not have the required balance. Both of these problems compound and are further compounded by what I believe is a seriously deficient lack of public notice and input on these issues. This does affect 90% of the privately owned land in the county, over 750,000 acres. And my conclusion is that the very predictable result is that the recommendations as they stand today are not good public policy. The rest you've got and can read, and I've offered to Mr. Boyson already and Mr. Cooney to meet with either of you two anytime at your convenience if you wish to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Field. Chuck Williams?
Good morning.
Morning, Chuck.
I have a request. A few weeks ago, there was an incident that happened where proper public notification wasn't given on a project in Orchid in regards to the oil fields. And there was I believe it was Mr. Apple had to make a public apology for that. I would request that ROTOP and the Orchid Area Advisory Group be emailed or mailed notification of all upcoming projects that has to do with Old Orchid and Orchid in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll take a note of that. All right, anybody else who would like to speak on anything that's not on today's agenda? If-
Mr. Thorndike is in Santa Barbara.
Mr. Thorndike?
John Thorndike here from Toro Canyon, and on zoning and ag, I would like to suggest respectfully that ag zoned should be parcel size. In other words, you don't want a parcel to be 3 zones. You'll have the predicament I've been in, where they have me for hand grading when I'm raking and hoeing at my entrance, which is 224 feet wide and is zoned agricultural, which it belongs agricultural. But I can't even put a little place to park my car because the OST construction from Ventura, at the behest of the Fish and Game, took out my driveway, took out my parking area, and I can't get one back in. So if my function or my focus here is that you have not more than one zoning for a parcel. And I understand that Mrs. Meester is looking into that. Diane Meester is looking into that. Is that right?
Possibly.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thorndike. Anybody else? All right, if not, we'll move on to Planning Commissioner's informational reports. Do we have anything today? Appears not.
Actually, I do.
Yes,
Yeah,
excuse
Mr.
me.
Chair, I do too.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Commissioner Smyser.
Okay, then. I just, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, the broadcast of our commission meeting had a great picture over the last 2 weeks, but it had no sound. And so I've received a number of calls and concerned, hopefully, that could be rebroadcast. I don't know if that's a possibility, but if it's, and I see someone's getting ready to talk about that. If it's not, I would like to make one clarification of a comment that I made at that meeting, because it came up again this morning in public comment. And if you'll bear with me, it's just 3 short, very short paragraphs, but it goes to our Ag Subcommittee. I wanted to just say that I believe that the public should be involved in this process of recommendations, particularly in ag land use policy. I also believe that where land use policies directly impact specific communities, that community must be involved in the open meeting process, accessible to members of that community. My concern that I would like to share with the Ag Subcommittee is that because our meetings take place during the day and away from those communities, I would ask that you would think about what kind of structures we might be able to do, like a community plan process or whatever. I'm going to leave it up to you, but we're hearing these concerns and these complaints, and I know that everyone on this committee wants the public to be involved in these decisions and wants the most open meeting as possible. So I know that hopefully that you can come back with some suggestions. You know, last week we had 2 groups propose changes to land use policies on ag lands. One was the Ag Advisory Committee that was working as part of the PIT process together with the Ag Commissioner's Office and the Ag Planner, and they submitted proposals for revisions to the permit process, and we heard members of the community say that they wanted to have more input in the actual recommendation process itself. And then the other group was the Gaviota Coastal, Gaviota Coastal Conservancy was one of the groups, but there was a private group of concerned citizens and conservation groups that represented their recommendations for land use policies on ag lands, again, on the Gaviota Coast. And the concern that I had was, again, these are recommendations coming forward that the public really hasn't been involved in that process. So if our subcommittee could, in addition to meeting with those groups, could also maybe help us, Mr. Chairman, with some way to get the public more involved in these recommendations for changes in land use, so that we don't just get a book of recommendations in front of us, maybe some of which don't even comply with our county ordinances, but in some way perhaps get some vehicle or strategy for vetting this to the public and allowing staff to review it and then hold the public process here in front of us. So we've got some public process, some open meeting process, and it's a big task, and I don't know how to do it, but I'm suggesting that maybe they can take that on.
All right, thank you very much. I'm sure that Commissioner Boyce and Commissioner Cooney are listening to all this, and they'll come back and give us a feedback on that. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of meetings ago, we were scheduled to hear a project called the Huragan project, and it was delayed for some design review issues, which I think probably are going to be contentious based upon the amount of email traffic I've been seeing from the neighbors. The reason I bring this up is that currently there are story poles up on the site, and they probably won't be up very long, maybe just this week. So if any commissioner is interested in going by, I have the address, and seeing story poles, I would encourage you to do that. The project's going to the BAR this week. They made a site visit yesterday. So hopefully many of these issues will be resolved before we get it at the Planning Commission. But if you're interested, I have information on the directions and other things here.
All right.
Okay,
thank you very much. Anybody else? All right, thank you. If not, we'll go on to Planning and Development Divisional briefings. Ms. Meeser, do we have anything today?
Mr. Chair, no, we don't.
All right. And with that, we'll go on to the Director's Report and Board of Supervisors hearing summary. Mr. Baker?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, there were no hearings yesterday. A number of them were set, however. So the San Marcos Golf Course appeal is set for the 26th. The amendment for height restrictions that Doug Anthony presented to you, I think it was about 3 meetings back, will be heard that day. The Arroyo Honda Steelhead project appeal will be heard that day. And the final on the Rancho Danza del Sol, that's the commercial horse ranch appeal, will also be heard on the these are all going to be heard on the 26th. The ordinance for home occupation in ag lands was continued to not a date certain at this point in time. It's going to be determined. I think of interest to some of the people out there, maybe not everybody on the Commission, but the Santa Ynez Valley Community Plan meeting to be essentially co-chaired by Chairman Joni Gray and Vice Chairman Brooks Firestone is tonight in Solvang at the American Legion Hall. And lastly, on Monday, there was a joint Planning Commission bar coordinating meeting. Chairman Valencia was there. He could speak more to that if he thinks there's a need. But I felt very good about the interaction of these different members talking about ways to improve the service to the public and for better information to the both the Planning Commission and the 4 different bars that we operate. And with that, happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. Ms. Brown?
Thank you. I just wondered, because I do have interest in the BARs, and I sort of follow the South Coast BAR and their scheduling difficulties and their increased workload. I was just wondering if there was going to be, perhaps, Mr. Chair, you'd relate to us those discussions, if there was anything of substance that
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you.
We did discuss, they discussed their workload, and as you can imagine, when you look at the agenda for a BAR, they have 15 or 20 items, so they have a very heavy workload, and they're trying to work a little better with the planners. They're having difficulty getting everything in mesh so they can step through the projects very carefully. So a lot of it is a new cycle for them because of the amount of workload that they have in the new C-bar, N-bar, S-bar, M-bar type concept that they're involved in. Actually, the most important thing that came out was from the Landmark Commission. There seems to be a trigger of 50 years for things that become of historical significance. And there's probably 40,000 tract homes in Santa Barbara County that are approaching that level, you know. So are they all going to be, and the question was raised, are they all going to be of historical significance? And if you want to change a window or something, do you have to go through this permit process? There was one house that came up, was being asked to be demolished, and of course the Landmark Commission did a site visit and said, of course, absolutely, it's a piece of, you know, it's terrible, just demolish it. But the process they had to go through was overwhelming, and so as one of the things I think that we're going to have to be looking at is this trigger of 50 years. All of a sudden it's here, you know. All the tract homes are 50 years or approaching that. So it's something that wasn't paid attention to years ago, but now are we going to save every Dairy Queen, you know? So that was the major thrust. Any questions? Commissioner Boyce.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I might, in response to Commissioner Brown's question, one of the items was discussed, and I think, you know, it's something that we got to take care of in our hearing support, is the idea that once you have gone through preliminary review, as of course you can't get a final out of the bar until after it's gone through the commission and maybe the board. But the idea that if they have received their preliminaries is that they would be placed on a consent calendar so that they would be run through relatively quickly at the beginning of those meetings, because right now they're being placed back onto the regular agenda, and when they get there they tend to take a lot more time. So there's an idea of doing that. There was also the question of whether we could have 2 meetings a month instead of 1. Of course, if we do that, that puts a major stretch on our people in terms of hearing support with 4 bars, 2 planning commissions, and of course the Board of Supervisors that go in, plus the community plan. So that's something we've got to look at very seriously.
Mr. Baker, just a comment, and I guess really a question. You know, I think originally when the split occurred with the addition of the new North County BARs, it was thought it would just simply take the load off South County and it would be equally divided. But what I see as I'm looking at the agendas is typically North County BAR agenda is never full. It may be a half day. Sometimes the C-bar as well. So while the workload is greater, it's the division of labor is not equal, if you will, and I would think so. It may be that it needs to be just rethought. That in fact, this South BAR needs to have 2 a month, because I know now they're scheduling. There's no set schedule. It's 1 month, and then they do an additional meeting. And I think for staff, for the public, I think that's a very sort of difficult way to handle a process. I think it needs to be a regular process that's the first and third Friday or whatever, however it occurs. And also I'm aware that the staff is looking at the BAR process. I believe that you have a consultant who's looking at how BAR is conducted and some other things. And perhaps all of this can be put together and looked at. I don't even know if the commission will be seeing that or hearing that, the results of that. But I think it would be helpful, because I know just in talking to BAR members that it's becoming a rather daunting job, just the way it's set up now, and it's not really a smooth functioning process. And I would hope that it would be for all, for applicants, for your staff, and for the public as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Boyson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My ears perked up a little bit when you talked about the historical landmark. As you know, when I was chair last year, I was part of the PC-BAR joint meetings, and this issue had come up at one of those meetings. And I was assured at that time that this was and I don't know how properly to put this, but that this was really a South County issue. I think that in the North County, as the chairman has so eloquently pointed out, we probably have a whole bunch of historical significant subdivisions that are in desperate need of repair. And if we have to start going through some historical landmark committees and that sort of thing, I really don't want to go there just yet. I'm not saying that I don't want to preserve historical landmarks, and I realize and believe me, we are very, very conscious here in the North County regarding historical landmarks, but we have enough impediments to the process up here, and we just like to make sure that, if it ain't fixed or if it ain't broken, let's don't try and fix it. We really aren't having a lot of clamoring up here in the North County, and we really do feel that we have enough reviews in place that we can throw some common sense at it. So I think I made that clear in our committee meeting at the time last year. But I just want to reiterate that and make sure that that's the path that we're going on, and that I certainly respect the legacies, and we have certainly made some mistakes up here in North County by taking down some buildings a little too quick and that sort of thing, and we're going to learn from our mistakes. But I don't know if we need another layer of bureaucracy up here to help us along that line.
Good point, Commissioner Boyson. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think from my experience in the 2nd District, it's not so much about the 60s or the late 50s tract homes, but it's about those historical structures on Goleta Valley farmlands, which are still, these structures still exist. Some have been designated as historical structures. And as these lands get developed, there are historic structures that need to be considered. And for me, I think that's the point. It's that they have been there 70, 80 years for some of these, and some, you're right, don't certainly warrant it. And I don't envision that we're going to be putting our 50s and 60s subdivisions through historical review. I think it's, perhaps Ms. Meester would like to add some clarity to that.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is always a difficult issue because there are initial sort of very broad screening requirements, and 50 years is what you hear frequently. But what you don't hear is that the structure needs to have historical significance, meaning either something very historic happened in the structure, it was built or designed by a really renowned architect, and it's a model piece of architecture. So there are lots of criteria. 50 years is just the first one. We're not going to be making any recommendations that every 50-year-old home built in anywhere in the county go through the Historic Landmarks Advisory Committee. The committee has done, I wouldn't say exactly a thorough analysis of properties in the county, but has done some analysis of properties in the county and indicated those that they think are important. Those are the sites that we'll have some heightened review on, as well as a few others that might pop up from time to time that we know are of historic merit. But it's not something that will be applied on a blanket policy where if you have a house that happens to be 50 years old, that'll be treated as a historic structure. But it is kind of tricky, and it's something that I think we need to look into again, because that 50-year trigger is encompassing a lot more than it did 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So I think it's a good issue to highlight. I did mean to mention one other thing, and it also came up at the joint meeting, and that is the ethics training. I think we talked about that last week. That ethics training is scheduled for October 27th from 9 to 12. It's in the county, Santa Barbara County Administration Building in the Santa Barbara area, as well as this room. It'll be teleconferenced, and it's from 9 to 12. And everybody on the Planning Commission needs to attend that, if at all possible. If that's a date that does not work for you, we will obviously have to make some other arrangement, but it's a legal requirement that you undertake this training during this calendar year. Pardon?
Can you record it so we can have a CD of it? Or do we need to be in person?
Well, I think we need to look into that. We also know there is an online option, but it's not the ideal way of receiving this kind of training. So if you're going to have trouble with that date, just let me know or speak with Dave Allen with County Counsel's office, or call Shane Stark directly. And if we need to, we'll record it, or we'll have another meeting to repeat it. But we want to make sure that the commissioners are able to make it.
And that date is
October 27th. It's a Friday from 9 to 12.
Okay, but you are going to look into the possibility of the online.
There is an online option, as I understand it.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Boyes, and members of the Commission, the Attorney General's office does have an online option.
Oh.
And
Do
I
we have
believed that was provided to you, and if it was not, I apologize.
Do we have a website, or can you
There is
provide
a
us with
website,
the
and I will, and I
website?
apologize that you didn't receive it.
I'd appreciate that, thank you.
Okay. And there was discussion at the, in case anybody else is watching that was at our meeting on Monday, there was discussion about which bodies needed to attend this training. And we were under the impression at that point in time that if you simply received mileage reimbursement but didn't get a per diem payment, that you didn't have to attend, and that apparently is incorrect. Anybody who is reimbursed for anything on a Brown Act committee with the County of Santa Barbara needs to attend the ethics training, and we recommend that others that don't receive compensation but are on Brown Act committees attend as well.
Commissioner Smizer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two things. One, Mr. Chair, I'm going to assume that if you have a certificate of completion of this ethics training from another body, that it will suffice. I can certainly send the certificate to you. And then secondly, I want to apologize for the telephone. My daughter just got back to Baghdad, and so I took that call.
Absolutely. Hope everything's fine. And I guess with respect to this trigger for housing, early sun-kissed isn't a criteria for protection. All right. There was one other item that came up. We decided that the Gaviota Coast was very critical, and there was a lot of development being planned in the future, not only for Naples, but throughout the coast. And so we decided that it would be good to plan for a workshop with the C-Bars, S-Bar, I believe it was, and the Planning Commission in the near future, to sit down and discuss so that we don't do piecemeal things. And when we discuss things, we're in separate meetings. We're not like this when we're working out an issue that we're very close with respect to size house and that type of thing. So that's coming up in the near future. It's being planned either January or during your tenure, Commissioner Cooney. That was the soonest we could plan for it, but it's something that's coming up. All right, and with that, we've completed our administrative agenda. We'll take a short 2-minute break to set up for the standard agenda.
Mr. Chair, to make an announcement so that people would be aware that for the North Point project, Mary Ann Slutsky of our office will be available by remote.
All right, thank you. And we'll take the short break to set up. The North Point Unit Phase 4. Ms. Valero, could you read that into the record, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Leo Evans to consider case number 98DP023, application filed on August 25th, 1998, for approval of a final development plan and to accept the prior environmental document 7-8 EIR 9 and supplement for implementation of CEQA.
Thank you, Ms. Valero. And that's, let's see, any site visits or ex parte? Commissioner Boyson?
Site visit with the agent yesterday.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown?
Site visit this morning, and I spoke with Ms. Tamura this week.
Thank you. And Commissioner Smyser?
I also did a site visit.
And the Vice Chairman, Commissioner Cooney?
I did drive by the site.
All right, very good. And I did a site visit the other day, and I had a conversation with Ms. Tamura. And with that, Mr. Appel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I'd like to just start with a little background information because this project has been around a long time, and I thought since I've been around a long time, I could kind of give some historical perspective on the project. It was originally approved as a 219-unit condo project. It was approved as a 6-phase project. It had a development plan and a track map which were approved in the late 70s, and the map recorded in 1982 for all 6 phases. Phases 1 through 4 are, well, let me just show you. We have Foster Road here and Hummel Drive. Phases 1 through 4 are in this area here. As you recall, when we've done our work on Key Site 30, which is down here, we've got the large clear zone that has to be maintained for the airport, the Santa Maria Airport, which is over here. So phases 1 and 4 are pushed up into the northeast corner, and then phases 5 and 6 are down here in the southwest corner. So altogether, when it's completely built, there'll be 219 units. Right now, we're talking 32 units in phase 4 that we're considering. As I mentioned, construction began in early 1982 after recordation of the map. Phases 1 and 2 were built, and then due to economic times and the lack of sales of condos, the property went into foreclosure. And so out of bankruptcy, we had several owners buying the properties. Phase 3 was developed as 2 separate phases. We called it Phase A and Phase B because we ended up with 2 owners there. And Phase 5 and 6 ended up being built separately by Affordable Housing Corporation. Phase 4 has remained unbuilt, although the underlying recorded track map has remained intact. The current owner of Phase 4 submitted a development plan back in August of '98. It went to the Planning Commission in April of '99, and it was continued by that commission until the owner was able to annex to the existing homeowners association. Well, that didn't go well, and he was unable to do that, so he came back to staff. The item was actually dropped from the agenda sometime later, and staff ended up asking County Council if it would be possible to form a separate homeowners association for Phase 4, provided that Phase 4 would also pay into the maintenance for the roads that are common to those phases, as well as the maintenance of the retention basin. And council agreed, and so it's a long path, but we're basically back today with the same project that had been approved back in the late 70s, and basically now allowing them to go forward as a standalone, from the sense that they meet their open space requirements. They would have their own homeowners association, their own amenities, and they would be required to pay into the maintenance for the common roads through the tract, as well as the maintenance of the basin. And so with that, I'll turn it over to John, who will give you more specifics of the project, since I think only one of you had been around long enough to have seen this project last time. John.
Thank you. Good morning, Planning Commission. Just before I begin, again, you should have a staff report from our planning development dated September 1st, and then also a memorandum from myself this morning, and as well as I think you have large scale maps for the project, including the reductions in the staff report. This slide here just shows a little bit closer view of the project site and aerial. And it's a little relationship to the existing North Point housing development. This is Hummel Drive right here. As you can see, the site has been, it's not in a pristine shape. It was roughly graded with the entire project when the entire project was graded in the 80s. It does have some off-road tracks across it, a couple of eucalyptus trees which have been identified for removal as part of this project. This shows the project density or zoning. It's zone DR 3.3, included all in this area here. It has a land use designation of Plan Development 3.3, and it's largely surrounded by existing residential development which already exists around the project site. This just shows a little bit closer view of its relationship on a map scale of this is what's being proposed today for development. Again, as Larry explained, these lots currently exist as part of the map 12414, which was recorded in 1982. It's 32 residential units that remain to be developed. All the other lots have been developed as part of the project. So let me touch upon what is actually before you today. The project description is a final development plan, which will allow development of 32 new townhome condominiums. 12 of the units would be two-bedroom units, approximately almost 1,700 square feet in size. The remaining 20 units would be three-bedroom units, a little over 1,800 square feet in size. You also have elevations and floor plans of what's being proposed, as well as landscape plans, which also show the open space amenities, which right now are barbecues, picnic tables, and benches. This slide shows the grading plan. It's a little difficult to see all the lines in it. Essentially, like I said, the site has been roughly graded. It's relatively flat because of the rough grading that happened prior to in the early 80s for the project. This shows the proposed elevations of what the developer would like to build. He would like to build, essentially duplicate what's already out there on the site. The homes are all two-story homes, have a two-car garage in front of them. They'd be built with tile roofs and a stucco siding. This picture of the floor plan. I apologize for not having it clearer, but maybe I could explain a little bit. I know you have versions of this in your staff report. This would be showing the first floor plans. They're mainly comprised of a garage on the first floor, and then there's a living room, dining room area towards the rear of the units. And then on the second story, you have the kitchen facilities and the kitchen facilities on the first floor. The second floor includes basically bathrooms and bedrooms. And on some of the options for the floor plans, you also may have a den or so, but that's the option of a future homeowner. But they are provided for. Well, as Larry said, this project has already been built, and so we have the opportunity to look at actually what these will look like rather than renderings. This is a picture of an existing home out there in the North Point project. Again, two-car garage doors in front, stucco siding, and tile roof on top. There's a picture of what the rear yard looks like. Essentially, again, stucco siding. This is just a picture. I went down one of the cul-de-sac streets and took it. Kind of gives you an idea of what the streetscape looks like. It sounds like many of you have already been out to the site, so you have that sense. For those who don't, this is what the typical street would look like, or does look like in the North Point project. This area is on the northern perimeter of the project site. It's an existing open space area in which the future homeowners would be able to use. It includes, as an example, the barbecue pit. Doesn't come out very clearly here. A bench and some other picnic tables. The applicant is also proposing to provide more of these in its other common open space area that are located between the residential units. Environmental review. As Larry indicated, this project was originally considered under 78 EIR 09. Subsequent to that, a supplemental document was prepared by our department in 1992, 92 SD 02. In that document, they found that there was one significant unavoidable impact, class 1, to schools, and that the project, however, was recorded prior to the school mitigation program fee requirement being implemented. So there is no school fees paid as part of this project that came out of that because of the date of the project and through the supplemental or through the agreement that the county has with the previous developer. There were significant but mitigatable impacts identified as well into, I think, 7 issue areas: aesthetics, air quality, geology, soils, noise, land use, water resources, solid waste, and traffic. Staff has prepared a CEQA 15162, which CEQA allows for or provides criteria when a previously certified environmental document can be used for a project and when you need to prepare a supplemental one. And essentially, there's several criteria that you need to kind of go through. Those would be that there's no substantial changes to the proposed project, no substantial changes to the circumstances under which the project was undertaken, nor are there any new significant environmental effects or substantial increases in the severity of the previously identified impacts that would result from the proposed project. Those are the criteria we look at. And so when we look at it from a planner's perspective, we look and say, what was looked at back then, what is he proposing now? As far as the effects, you could look at and say, well, originally when this project was considered by the Planning Commission in 1999, the applicant was providing several 4-bedroom units. Those have been taken off the table, so to speak, and he's only proposing 2- and 3-bedroom units. You know, the lot's already there, so there's no additional lots that he's proposing. So you can make, if anything, a slight argument that maybe impacts have been slightly lessened as a result of reduction in bedrooms. With regards to significant environmental impacts or any new effects or in circumstances, changes in circumstances, like I mentioned, the site has been roughly graded. When the project was originally considered, there was no significant biological impacts identified at that time. Staff has not identified any other now. It's fairly a degraded site, to be honest with you. It has some annual grasses, a couple of eucalyptus trees, none of which are considered significant losses in biological habitat. In the original EIR, they did identify as a mitigation that the applicant provide a landscape plan, and that mitigation has been carried forward on this project. And as far as changes in circumstances, again, this project it's different than some of the other projects you've looked at. We're talking, you know, almost decades here since it was originally approved. The county has identified the effects of the project, impacts, both beneficial and adversarial, and we've already known about them. Several of the impacts were, during the Orchid Community Plan, already considered as being already there with the county. So when they prepared the Orchid Community Plan and the roads department had to look at the impacts of what roads would be, the effects of roads for implementation of the Orchid Community Plan, this was considered as within the baseline of what was already existing, although the full project was not built out. In addition, so was for Laguna County Sanitation District, when they considered, you know, they had to upgrade their sewer plant, they considered this project as being within that baseline, that it was already existing out there. Let me move on if I can. Mitigation measures applied. Again, as I mentioned, there's a landscape plan as required that was brought forward through the environmental documents, utilizing or requires drought-tolerant plants. Landscape plan would be used to screen the project from existing homes, as well as, you know, provide you know, some nice amenities, trees and stuff in the open space area. In addition, we have dust control measures would be required as part of the grading and erosion control plan, minimize dust. Limitations of hours of construction. We have a condition on the project requires, you know, a typical standard condition 7 to 4, as well as there's an aviation easement that's also that the applicant is required to, or at least show that each lot has been recorded with that. Just to let future homeowners know that, again, this site is in close proximity to the Santa Maria Airport, and there are going to be occasional overflights by the airport, so it lets the future homeowners know that there will be some effects from that as far as sound. Just want to talk briefly on the issue summaries. One would be, is discussed in the staff report, consistency with the DR 3.3 zoning. If you look at the project site, a little over 3 acres, and with the proposal, if you just consider that site in itself, it has a quite high density. It would be outside that 3.3, almost 9.4 units per acre. However, if you take the project in its entirety, the North Point project, 219 units over 80 acres, it breaks down to 2.74 units per acre. So we found it to be consistent with the DR zoning. And again, it won't be duplicative of Larry's announcement, but the homeowners association requirements. Originally, they were required to annex in the existing HOA. However, working with county council, we determined that owners of the lots that would purchase by deed would have a right to use the roads in the subdivision. So as a result, we've conditioned the project that they must form their own HOA. And in addition, to get to their homes, they would have to use certain existing roads that are already provided by the North Point HOA, and their stormwater would drain into the existing basin. So we've required them to pay for their pro rata share of what that would be for operating and maintaining those facilities. Your staff report originally indicated the pro rata share was 15%. At that time, we calculated the project in its whole, all 219 units, and we divided that by the 32 units proposed, and that gave us that 15%. However, as Larry pointed out, the Mariposa homes to the further south, they have their own road structure, roadways, they have their own basin. So we took those 80 units out of the calculation. So what we did is we just divided the 32 units proposed, that are being proposed now, into, well, there's 107 homes as part of the North Point, so that would be a total of 139 units. So it came out to be the 23%. And the memorandum I gave you, or provided today, shows the new change in that percentage. And that's really concludes my presentation right now. And again, the staff recommends that the Commission's motion should be as follows: adopt the required findings in Attachment A, including CEQA findings, accept the environmental documents as adequate for the project, and adopt the mitigation program, and approve the 98 DP023 subject to the conditions included as Attachment B and as revised today. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Ms. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Zorovich, this slide that you showed us of this picnic area, is this, I'm not clear if it's covered under the current homeowners association's responsibilities, or what is this a part of exactly? They use it, the current HOA uses this area, is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, yes, the existing homeowners association does use that now, and it's located right up here, and they pay for that maintenance of that right now. It's my understanding in this project that the developer of this could also share in these the amenities that slide is taken a picture of. That's why I took that picture of. The other amenities, such as the tennis court and swimming pool, and those would not be available to the new owners. And then there are new additional picnic tables and benches that would be provided between the in the open space area between the existing lots.
Okay, but the current barbecue area, the current homeowners association maintains that. So, is that correct? Right. So, does that mean that this area is included in that agreement, that 23%, or is that just for the roads and the retention basin?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, that picture that shows that those existing amenities, those are built on his property. So yes, the
Wait,
HOA
they're built on
Mr. Evans' property.
Okay.
So right now, yes, they are to the benefit of the North Point existing HOA. However, once this project would be carried forward, then he would take those on, and the new HOA that would be formed would take responsibility for maintaining those amenities.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just one correction or one addition. One of the big issues had been annexing into the existing HOA and the costs of that. I have spoken with the property management company who takes care of the existing homes in North Point, and they have indicated that if an individual owner of one of the units in Phase 4 was to want to use the pool or the tennis courts, that they could work an arrangement with that family individually. So it's not that the overall, the Phase 4 will not be annexing to use those per se, but individually, if they want to, they'll have that ability.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Cooney.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Getting away from the substance of the project just for a minute, I have a concern about the process here, and in particular the environmental review. I think it is unusual that we're reviewing a project some 25 years after the original review of the project in which this was included as a part. And without getting into whether this is part of the original project and therefore a modification to that project, or whether it's an entirely new project which presents some nice legal issues, I had a discussion with County Council yesterday about the question of whether the county has done an adequate environmental review of whatever it is we have here. And as I read the CEQA rules, if you have a prior EIR that covers the project, and then you're deciding later on a modification to that project or even a subsequent phase like this, staff has to make a decision as to whether there needs to be a subsequent environmental document. And it isn't just changes in the project, which you've indicated are some, but not significant in your view. There are also, there is a need for environmental review and the preparation of a subsequent document if circumstances have changed. So I went at this project with the idea that we have heard many times over the last couple of years about dramatic changes in the Orchid area, the number of houses coming online, traffic issues, school issues, generally environmental concerns. And I thought, aren't these changed circumstances enough to justify some further environmental review? And correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears that the environmental review was done here, at least in terms of staff taking a look at it, but not in the context of the preparation of any subsequent document. It was worked into the staff report. There were some conclusions and statements about traffic loads at particular intersections. My concern, and County Council certainly is invited to address this now or subsequently in this hearing, is that at the very least, we were required to prepare an addendum to the environmental document, which we could consider in reaching our decisions here, as well as have in front of us the environmental impact report, so we'd have some knowledge of what the issues were. In other words, I think staff's desire to get a project before us with the minimum amount of time and issues where it doesn't appear the substance is really of any concern is going too far in terms of our obligations under CEQA. So I lay that out. Ms. Schlesky has had a chance to consider this too and has a good understanding of the issues. I'd be interested in all of us hearing her viewpoint on this.
Ms. Slutsky?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Yes, I have thought about this, and ultimately, of course, you will determine whether you think it's adequate or not. And I do want to point out, though, that 15162, staff used to prepare a separate document. Now I understand that, and this is a very recent change in the Planning and Development Department's procedures, they put that discussion in the staff report rather than in a separate document. 15162, though, provides that if there are changes in the circumstances or in the projects, that the public agency has the choice of an addendum, or let me read the language under subsection B. It says if changes to a project or its circumstances occur or new information becomes available after adoption, they determine whether to prepare a subsequent negative declaration, addendum, or no further documentation. I think often if staff believes the changes to the project or the circumstances are minor enough that the 15162 letter, now the 15162 paragraph in the staff report, is sufficient. But if the Planning Commission doesn't feel that is necessary or not true, you can of course request additional information. An addendum is very similar to our former 15162 letter in that it was just described the changes and whether they were significant, the circumstances and the changes and whether they were significant, and whether the new information led to new impacts. It's not circulated, just like an addendum is not circulated. It was treated very similar to an addendum. Now it's a little different, but you may want to go back to the old way or not. I think you should just tell planning.
Commissioner Cooney?
I wouldn't object to the efficiency of working it in the staff report, but in reading the language by which we're bound under state law, it says in 15164D, and this is a very short sentence, the decision-making body shall consider the addendum with the final EIR or adopted negative declaration prior to making a decision on the project. So if in fact there should be an addendum, and I think that's the appropriate document here, I think we're required to consider it. And there may not be one thing in the addendum that is raised that hasn't been raised by Mr. Zorovich in his staff report. And I hope that point isn't being lost. I think we need to follow CEQA, and in this county, we pay a lot of attention to environmental review, and even on a project of only 32 additional units in a built-up community, I think there's the potential for some environmental impact to this project, and we can't get by with a 27-year-old document. That's the whole point.
Thank you, Commissioner Cooney. About 7.5 years ago, or 8 years ago, this project came before us. I was serving on the commission at that time, and one of the main things that held this project up was that it could not make an agreement between the owners and the existing homeowners association. That was the major holdup, and that never passed. In the time since then, there have been 3 projects and a proposed project that have been approved. One was the retirement center. We gave a lot of thought to Hummel Road, the intersection and the traffic impacts. The second were the Hovel homes, which again was an impact, but didn't create much of an impact. And then third was a large affordable housing project. And this project has been under great scrutiny for traffic, all kinds of environmental impacts. Has been discussed over and over and over again. In addition to that, there was a proposal for an aquatic center about 5 years ago, which hasn't gone anyplace yet. But again, the entire place was discussed and all the impacts. We didn't find anything negative about it. The only thing I see in the project is I just want to make sure, to me, everything that I've read seems appropriate. And the thing that was holding this project up is finding how are they going to get into the HOA. The folks weren't able to make an agreement there. They have their own HOA. They're going to pay a partial payment on the road for the easement of use of the roads and the use of the water basin. The only thing I need to know is make sure that there's proof of water, delivery of water too, and proof of the navigation easement. And I have one minor item in terms of engineering. The minor term that I have in terms of engineering is that the existing development has blacktop up to the garages, and I think that's kind of inappropriate now at this time. I think it should be concrete. There are some platforms that have concrete, but most of them right in front of the swimming pool, all those homes there have blacktop right up to the top, and I don't think that's appropriate for a new development. Mr. Rimbel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few more piece of information on the CEQA process. As I said, this project had a long history, and I didn't go into all the details, but one of the things that I didn't mention, I probably should now, is that there was a lawsuit against the county in 91, 92 time frame over the fact that the development plan had expired for phases 3B, 4, 5, and 6. And out of that lawsuit, we ended up having a settlement. And I ended up preparing the supplemental document, that 92 SD document. And our hands were a little bit tied, but we still were able to show that there really were no new impacts as a result of building any of those remaining phases, taking into consideration the original EIR, that supplemental document, and then again in 1999, when the process was still to do a separate standalone 15162 document, that came to the same conclusions, that there were, basically it's the same project, there were no new impacts. And so I can understand Commissioner Cooney's issue, because it is a very long time since the original EIR was prepared, and our decision was not to put the entire EIR in your packet, because the department practice has been to just include the executive summary as sufficient data to give you the background information that was relied on and able to come to the conclusion that we could use an additional 15162. So we really have analyzed this project, and as John has mentioned earlier, the project has been considered part of the background as part of the Orchid Community Plan. They assumed those units were in place, that the traffic was part of the background, and so there are the physical impacts have already been discussed, and again, there are no new impacts that we could come up with. Otherwise, we would have done a different type of a document for you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we'll ask the applicant to come forward. Ms. Tamura.
Good
Good morning. My name is Lori Tamura with Urban Planning Concepts, and I'd like to recognize that Larry and I probably have grown up with this project, coming back into, starting with the county in 1980. Larry's presentation on the history of this particular project is pretty succinct, and I don't want to add more to it except for maybe 2 other bullet points. He did mention that in the mid-'80s, there were a series of phases that were built, and then there was a bankruptcy. Portions of that project went to an auction. It stayed vacant for a number of years. The remaining phases were not built for a number of years. In 91, or through 89, 90, and 91, another phase was built. Those were sold. There was a question about the development plans that had been the base record of the project, and because the project had taken so long, the development plans expired, and we had to go through negotiations on how to keep those projects going, because you had the lots already recorded, but you have the compendium project, the development plans that do have a life to them. There's, the 5 years, and you can ask for some extensions. In 97, that particular developer also let the project go back to the bank. So Midstate Bank owned several phases of this project for a couple of years, including this particular 32 units, the 80 units on the south side, the piece that the Aqua Center has ultimately owned, were all owned by Midstate Bank. The People's Self-Help Housing Project picked up the Mariposa site. Several of the planning commissioners are familiar with the effort that went on to build those units, and they're very successful on the south side, but they've operated as a separate project now. They're not part of the HOA for North Point. They are owned by People's Self-Help, and they maintain that area. The Aqua Center site is owned by the Aqua Center. They maintain that site, and there's an application coming forward soon on that site. The last piece of the puzzle for the North Point project is the 32 units that are before you today. Mr. Evans stepped in, bought it from Midstate in about 1998, made an effort to renew the development plan, because again, that development plan had expired in 98 and 99. There were Planning Commission public hearings at that time, discussions with the HOA, and over that period of time, Mr. Evans dropped the project and allowed the negotiations to go in a different direction. So we are here today to talk about the project in context with the existing community, the environmental review issues that were brought up by Commissioner Cooney, and hope for support by the Planning Commission to move this project forward. I have a couple of slides I'd like to go over just to provide context, and then we'll add a couple of other points. Jeanette? If we look at the slide here, again, Larry already went through this, but we do have a project that was originally approved in 1979 in total. It was one of the first big condominium projects. There was a period of time, we think we were doing neo-traditional design and cluster development now, but planners were doing it back in the 70s and 80s, and this is one of them. The village was clustered into the corners to allow for the flight path at the airport, the clear area. The first phases were recorded, and then we had the bankruptcies and foreclosures. So you have a whole timing sequence here. This project is in context with Quayside 30, the Woodmere project. This is the senior housing project, some Suncrest Gardens, and obviously the rest of the community. Go ahead. This is the location of the project as it fits within the center. Again, the 32 units, access roads, in this perimeter road. The required parking is located in the perimeter areas. We got extension of walkways, and this will be the new open space area for the homeowners. Go ahead. This particular slide you've seen before in other projects. Again, it shows the flight path at the airport in this corner here, Quayside 30, and then you also have the existing North Point project here, and the site is right here. The interesting thing is to note that most of this area is built out. The only areas that we're talking about for other additional potential development is Quayside 30, the Aqua Center. This is also another key site that has, I don't think, an application in process yet on it. And then, of course, this 32 units, and pretty much the rest of that area in the center of Orchid has been built out. This was actually an exhibit within the Orchid Community Plan process. And again, as Larry mentioned, North Point as a total, 219 units has been the baseline for all of the environmental reviews through the 90s and through the 2000s. And it does show in here the 32 units. This was, again, one that was showing the potential for the Union Valley Park area here, and again, the other phases of the North Point project and Suncrest Gardens. We provided this exhibit just to illustrate that even as you go through the history of ORCID documents, the whole map for North Point has always been indicated there. Okay. So what's the next exhibit? Oh. I have had some conversations with staff as well as a question by the commissioners as regards to the navigation easement, which is one of the conditions on the map or on the staff conditions. What we did is we went through all of the historical documents, the original recordation back in 82, and looked at some of the old CC&R documents that were done for the original North Point Homeowners Association. There's reference within the CC&Rs of that document for recognizing the flight path of the airport, but there is not, as far as we can tell, an actual recorded document for an navigation easement. So we will agree to the condition of approval that says we will record an navigation easement that will run with the property on these 32 units to recognize that we're within the area of planes flying over. That condition was required for the Mariposa condo project on the south side, but because this project was so old or done in the 70s, that wasn't a requirement previously. In their CC&Rs, it does have provisions that recognize that there is planes flying over, and that's what these underlined sections are. It talks about the airplanes coming over their site. And so it is a buyer notice for that. The project is recognized by both Laguna County Sanitation and formerly Cal Cities, now Golden State, that they have rights to water and sewer for this project. So we have the original clearance letter from back in '82 for the map when it was recorded. Staff, Marty Wilder and Public Works has recognized this project as one of their baseline projects all the way through. For any permit that's been issued subsequently, they're holding the 32 for this site. And also for the Cal Cities, they have a can and will serve letter also. We're available to answer any questions, and as staff noted, there is a condition here that talks about working with the Homeowners Association to establish a pro rata arrangement with them to cover the costs of maintenance of the access roads as well as maintenance of the basins themselves. The applicant does want to continue to pursue establishing his own Homeowners Association and basically complete the last piece of the puzzle. Thank you very much. I'm available for any questions that I believe either Mr. Evans or Mr. Rick would like to make a statement.
All right. Any questions by the commission? All right. If not, thank you very much.
Did you want to come?
Mr. Evans, did you want to say something?
We'd like to respond if there's any questions after.
Oh, all right.
Thank you.
This time we're going to open the public hearing. Thank you very much. We have some people who would like to speak on this subject, opening the public hearing. First will be Chris Guenther. I'm sure I slaughtered that.
Yes, you did. It's okay. It's a silent E. It's Guenther.
Guenther.
Yes. Yeah, my name is Chris Guenther. I'm an attorney, and I practice in the area of common interest developments. One of my clients is North Point. And I was involved with this project back when the last time it was before the commission for the purposes of adopting a development plan. And at that time, and at all previous times, my understanding is annexation was a requirement of the Planning Commission for this particular 32-unit complex. And there's a reason for that. The project itself is integrated into the existing North Point project. We've had some discussion here that there are private roads. Very important issue. There is a discussion about a retarding basin or a retention basin This is also owned by the association and will be used by this project. Those are quote-unquote common areas. Common areas that will be used, that are used currently by the North Point residents, the 117 units. They also, this project wants to use them as well. Now, consider that. What I want to do first is show you what the ownerships of the properties are. Okay, this is the proposed site right there. Now, the roads, you can't see them very well, but the primary access roads, can you make that any bigger? Yeah, point them out for me. Yeah, I can't see that one. Okay. Okay, those roads are private roads. They're owned by the association. So, what Mr. Evans, the applicant, wants to be able to do is use those private roads to access his 32-unit complex. At the same time, he wants to use this water retention basin area to drain his water, all of which are part of the Orcutt community plan, that he is required to use those. Now, what hasn't been told to you is what Mr. Evans owns. He owns this project site, but he also owns fee title to this area right here, which is, my understanding is Unit 3, Phase 3B, and Unit 3, Phase A. Now, why does he still own the fee title to that? Because he didn't transfer it to the association, or his previous developers, predecessors did not transfer it. What they did do was they transferred an easement to the land under 3A. All of this common area that's underneath these units is considered Lot 148. Now, at some point in time, this Lot 148 has to be transferred to the association. And in fee, not just an easement interest under these, he needs to transfer everything. So as part of this project, that obviously needs to be done. Now, the only way he can do that is to subdivide Lot 148, because Lot 148 also goes underneath his project. So he's going to have to subdivide those two parcels if he was to have a separate association, which I'm going to talk about in some detail as to why that does not work. But anyway, I want to make sure that you understand that he still owns fee title, and he is required by the documents to transfer that common area to the association. He should have done it already. He hasn't done it. He will have to do it with this project. Now, what's the difference in this current plan with what we had back in 1999? The primary difference, and Mr. Valencia stated this, the primary difference is the staff is suggesting that there should be no annexation requirement. That in fact, we can get by with paying a pro rata share for the cost of maintenance of those roads and that water basin, or that retention basin. Now that doesn't work. But it's based upon, in the staff report, what County Council has determined, I guess, some legal right that Mr. Evans has to use the roads, because in his deed, this is what is said, in his deed it refers to the subdivision. And because it refers to the subdivision, therefore he has the right to use the subdivision roads. What's interesting about that, there's no authority cited for that. Nothing. No statute, no case law, nothing. And at this point, I want to point out, I got these documents, the staff report I got Friday, the attachments weren't available until yesterday for me. I see nothing in the attachments from County Council which says some authority for that proposition. But that's not the only proposition. Even if that were true, okay, it wouldn't apply, I don't believe, to this factual circumstances. We have a developer who fits in the shoes of the prior developer. That prior developer committed this property to this project and this build-out. And now they want to basically ignore that. But this property owner, he's one man, and now he wants to subdivide that property and make that access available to 32 new units. I don't think the law goes that far. I haven't had an opportunity to research that issue. Maybe County Council can give some insight, but I certainly see nothing in your documents that talk about that issue. Nothing. No cite, just an outright statement. So I think that there's a real problem with the legal right of the applicant to use those roads.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up, Mr. Gunter.
I need some more time, sir.
Like, how much time do you need?
I'm about halfway through.
All right, I'm going to grant you that, but I mean, in the future, you need to speak to the chair or the staff about, you're not coming in as a public hearing to speak about the project. You're coming in as a representative of the organization, and you need more than the allotted 3 minutes. I'm going to allow you to speak another 3 or 4 minutes.
My apologies. I haven't spoken before this commission for 6 years, and I did not realize the rules, so my apologies to the commissioners. Now I want to discuss why this pro rata payment of a share of the cost of the maintenance won't work. Basically, I view this as a situation in which the common interest development law applies. We create common interest developments for a reason. The reason is governments don't want to take on the infrastructure of these developments. So the developers, in order to develop the property, basically say, we'll take that on. We'll take on the roads. We'll take on the pool. We'll take on those maintenance responsibilities, and then they pass it on to the homeowners association. In this particular case, this plan of paying a pro rata share really ignores a body of law that's been in place since 1986, and there are numerous amendments to it. And that body of law sets forth a basis for handling common interest areas. It covers management and maintenance issues. It covers assessments that are assessed to the members to pay for the maintenance and management. There's nothing proposed in this proposal that speaks to those issues. That's why they're there. Now, let's just take an example. Let's say you're a buyer of one of these condominium units. You have no control, under this current plan, you have no control over when the access roads are going to be maintained, what's going to be done to them, whether or not there's going to be a reserve fund put aside to do the 2-inch overlay that every road needs down the road. Those property owners will have no say in that at all. And quite frankly, if you're going to have them pay a percentage and you're going to force an agreement down North Point's throat, there still has to be some agreement as to what it is and how it's going to be done. How is North Point going to collect the money from the 32 property owners without the Common Interest Development Act at their side? The Common Interest Development Act provides for assessments. Okay? You can assess the property owner. The assessments are then paid. If they're not paid, what happens? The association has the right to enforce that against the property owner, not only in court, but by means of a non-judicial foreclosure sale. That means putting a lien on the property. That gives them the leverage they need to collect that money. Without that, you have basically nothing. Now, it also goes to the association goes to the issue of control over that road. The new buyers of these condominiums are going to have no control over those roads. The association can put a new gate up. The association can change the traffic flow. The association, will have no control over how the people drive on those roads. And that's important. All of those things would be handled if there was an annexation of these units. Now, I want to propose what the options are. The annexation option is clearly the best option. A second option is the county takes over these roads and pays for everything. I don't think you want that. There is the potential for a third option, but it does get rather convoluted, and that is a situation in which, and you will probably have come across this in your time on the commission, where a developer comes to you with a project that is similar to North Point in the sense that there are phases. But each phase, they propose that at each phase being distinct, okay? But yet they have roads to access each phase, which are part of a master association. And that master association, each of the owners in each condominium are part of the sub-association and part of the master. What we have here is a situation that needs 3 associations if it doesn't get annexed. We need an association to handle the common area of the roads and the basin for everybody. And we need the and if in fact the applicant wants to have a separate association to handle his particular subdivision or sub-association, and we have North Point. The problem is we're doing it after the fact. It's not like that was presented to us at the beginning. Now, I think the association is willing to listen to that kind of a proposal, but at some point in time, Mr. Evans has to come to the association and talk to us, and that has not happened.
Okay, you're going to have to wrap up now.
Okay.
You got 30 seconds to wrap up.
Well,
I have other speakers.
well, I understand. I think all of the North Point speakers would probably defer to me.
No, we're
You
not
wanna
going to
ask
defer.
them?
They're going to speak if they like to speak. I'll run the meeting. And I was courteous to you, and I allowed you some time. And if there's time for a rebuttal, I'll allow you to rebut. But we're not going to work out a civil action here at this commission. We're doing a site-specific project. You brought up some information that is very critical, and our attorney will try to answer some of those questions.
Okay, I will sum up. For these reasons, we disagree with the findings 2.1.1 and 2.1.3, and that regards access issues, and I'm going to make this quick. We disagree with the findings of 2.1.5 with regards to health, safety, comfort, convenience, and general welfare of the neighborhood. We disagree with finding 2.1.6 because without the annexation, the project really does not meet the density requirements, does not meet the Orcutt Community Plan flood control and drainage requirements. We also disagree with the conditions of approval number 3. We believe these are private roads. The developer needs to come to the association and work out some mitigation agreement regarding the use of those roads during the construction process. As to condition of approval 13, we also believe this project demands annexation. Or you must deny this development plan because it doesn't meet the Orcutt Community Plan. And with that, I'll conclude. I would like the opportunity to rebut, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Commissioner Boyson.
Mr. Gunther, thank you very much for your presentation. A couple of questions. As you represent the Homeowner Association, what are the current dues of the Homeowner Association?
That I can't answer.
Okay, and has there been any talk or proposal if the new units were to annex, as far as would they, would there be a new fee schedule? Or, well, if you can't answer the first one, you probably can't answer the
Well,
second.
what happens in homeowners association law is each year the association has to put together a budget.
No,
and sends
I
out a budget.
understand. I understand.
And in that budget it includes reserves for the various major components. So they reevaluate that each year. If there is a new project involved in the association, then obviously there's new major components and they have to reevaluate.
I guess my question was, would these 32 units in that evaluation process, would they be looked at differently from, in other words, would they, if there's 290, or if there's 180 units currently, I'm not sure how many there are.
So 117.
117, and you'd add these 32. Each homeowner would then be responsible for 1/149th of the homeowner association
That's
responsibility.
normally how it
There
works,
wouldn't
yes.
be, I'm just asking whether there'd be
Yes.
any sort of different burden on the new condominiums.
You know, that would have to be evaluated by somebody who does budgets, but ordinarily, that's how it works. When you add something in, then you would create the division in the larger number, as I would understand.
Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. And just to follow on from Commissioner Boyson's question, because part of the budgeting or the monthly fee incorporates the reserve, if for some reason the current homeowners association has under-reserved for future maintenance, how would, if this project were to annex into that, they would have to be treated differently, the new homeowners from the current homeowners?
I don't believe so.
Well, if you assume that there has been an under-reserve for components, because there could be a disagreement between those coming into the association and those in the existing association if there hasn't been an appropriate reserve or if reserves have been somehow expended.
Mhm.
So it would seem to me that that would have to be somehow a separate issue or some different way of looking at what their participation is.
Well, I think that is part of the negotiation process between the developer and the association. I think the developer's going to want to know. The developer's going to have to go to DRE, Department of Real Estate here. I don't think Department of Real Estate is going to be happy with paying a pro rata share. They're going to want to have an association set up that can handle and give those rights to those buyers of those condominiums, the right to have some control over those amenities.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sandra Walker, followed by Leo Evans. Okay, excuse me for a second. I just take them in the order that I get them, but if you'd like to go to the end, all right, we'll do that. Please.
I have nothing further to say. I concur with Mr. Gunther.
All right, thank you for coming. Fred Glick.
Yeah, my name is Fred Glick. I'm the attorney for the applicant for this project, Leo Evans. And I would like to respond to the some of the things that Mr. Gunther indicated to you. First of all, Mr. Gunther and I coached Little League together, and we often had disagreements then. We're definitely going to have a disagreement here. I think you probably all know better than I do the history of why this issue with the homeowner association occurred. But the reason it occurred was that up until about 10, 12 years ago, there wouldn't have been an issue at all, but the current homeowners association amended their CC&Rs. And in that amendment, they required a approval from the board of directors to allow further annexation. Up until that time, you simply needed to file or record what was known as a declaration of annexation. Therefore, the board put themselves squarely between the applicant and you guys for approval for this project. The difference is they wanted money. You can't legally ask for money. You're just here as a board representing the people. But they wanted money for Mr. Evans to come in. Mr. Gunther said they've never talked to the homeowners association. In fact, right after the last commission meeting, it's my understanding that Mr. Gunther, along with two members of the board, Mr. Evans, his planner, and his daughter did meet with them. And they got a laundry list of items that they wanted in order to allow the annexation to occur. At that time, as you probably are aware, in 1999, the real estate market was on the rise. Things were looking good, but Mr. Evans determined that it was not a good economic decision, that he couldn't afford it. So he decided, I'll have my own homeowners association. He began discussions with staff, with county council, and that's when he came to me. Mr. Gunther says he doesn't know on what basis they can use the roads. I provided a letter to the county council indicating what basis that was. Without getting into it, and you don't need to know this, it's a legal issue, but there's just a vast case law of being able to rely on the map showing the roads and on your deeds. There's no question about it. I would like to tell you that what Mr. Gunther was referring to as the Common Interest Law is known as the Sterling Davis Common Interest Act. Now that act is managed by the Department of Real Estate. The Department of Real Estate will not allow Mr. Evans to sell one lot until they issue a public report. And that public report is going to pretty much summarize to every resident what their obligations are going to be with regard to their assessments and their obligations to maintain not only their common areas, but the roads as well. I have this issue going on up at Oak Shores right now, 720 unit residence subdivision. Same thing. They said, later phase, we're not going to let you in unless you pay us a lot of money. Went to court. Court determined that you have every right to use those roads, but you boys and girls better get together and you better come up with an agreement. And if you can't, I will. And they did. And that's what's going to happen here. And it's not going to be your job or anybody in the county's job to deal with that. It's going to be our job. And we're going to have to satisfy the Department of Real Estate, and we will. And we can do it several ways. But again, that is not something that I think you guys have to get into. There is phase, I think it's phases 5 and 6. They obviously don't use the road, but I assume that they're part of the retention basin. They're not part of the association, but they come up with an agreement with the flood control district, as we will. Now, if we can't work it out with them, then there's a simple way to do it, and we'll do it. And that will satisfy the Department of Real Estate. Not to say, even if this project goes through, we won't meet with them. We will. I can assure you I will meet with Mr. Gunther and see if we can work something out, because that's in everybody's best interest. And if we can join them, we will.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
No.
Glad to ask them.
Steve Walker?
Good morning. I'm Steve Walker. I'm the president of the Village North Point Townhomes Association Board of Directors. I sent you a letter dated 6 September. I don't know if you've reviewed it. There are a number of points in there that concerns raised among our membership. We did have our annual meeting last weekend and discussed this at great length. One thing I do need to correct, a misstatement made by Mr. Zorovich. There is no mechanism for individual families to buy into the existing amenities such as the tennis court, the basketball courts, the volleyball court, the swimming pool, or other areas. If someone at Getz Property Management made that statement, they were incorrect and not authorized to do that. Indeed, a great deal of our time right now is spent policing our area from people from surrounding neighborhoods who have the idea, for example, that the basketball courts are a public facility or something. And if you approve this separate association, that's going to multiply our difficulties with that. And we don't want to be in a combative or difficult arrangement where we have new neighbors and we have to tell them they're looking at all these fine amenities and they're not able to use them. We have to form our own little police force, or we just accept that they're going to impact our maintenance of those areas, which is a considerable expense to us, and our members pay dearly to maintain all those, and that they're going to use them, and we can't stop them. Obviously, there are a number of things for you to consider. I tend to agree with Commissioner Cooney that there is probably consideration of a new environmental impact study that should be done considering the amount of time lapse, but that's up to you. Mr. Gunther has brought up some legal points. I'm just speaking to you on behalf of the members. We see a lot of difficulties with this idea of a separate association. I think most of you said you've done site visits, or so you're aware this is not like Mariposa Townhomes that's several blocks down the road and physically removed. This is right in the middle. This is a little island of a new development in our sea of 107 townhomes. And I just foresee a lot of difficulties with this. Our members are concerned about this. This letter was CC'd to Joni Gray's office, and several of our members, I understand, have contacted her expressing concern. I've been contacted by members of other homeowners associations that are concerned about this. And I would just like to ask you to be consistent with previous Planning Commission decisions that annexation is a condition of this proposal. I've been through several of these before. I've lived at North Point for 14 years. We dealt with Midstate Bank, Tony Wells, and his partner, the other Tony, I can't remember his name, several people. And there were probably, at that time, expectations, as the real estate market was booming back then. There may have been some expectations by some of those people on those annexation committees that were unrealistic. We would welcome a new development in North Point, the build out of this phase. Indeed, we've been waiting 7 years to hear from Mr. Evans. Those negotiations were not broken off by us, they were broken off by him. And we have been waiting to hear from him again, and we're ready to work with him. And we only ask for reasonable mitigations to our operating accounts and reserves, only for the impacts of the new units. That's all we're looking for. We want to protect our quality of life for our families, protect the value of our homes, and we would welcome new neighbors who are a part of North Point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. We have some questions for you. Commissioner Cooney.
Just, Mr. Walker, your letter was it addressed to the commission? Because
yes.
I don't find it among our materials.
Either.
I think we want to make sure and get a copy of that letter, and if you have one, maybe you could provide it to staff and they'll copy it for us.
I'll see to that.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Brown. Oh, that was it? All right, Commissioner Smizer.
I'm going to ask the question that was asked a moment ago. I think you probably could answer it. What is the cost of the fees per unit to your association members?
Right now, it's $210 a month.
Okay. And I'm going to ask this question just because I want to get a clarification, and I know this is going back. The applicant has indicated through their attorney that the association requested some payments. I don't know if it was payments to meet or payments for something. Are you aware of what payments were requested? Did the association request payments?
I was involved in the initial discussions with Mr. Evans last time. I believe it was 1999. However, I had to leave the annexation committee because of other duties. Diane Simon, another of our members who's asked to speak here, has more details on that. We are not, from our standpoint, I don't think we're ready to start from ground zero.
Okay. Okay, I think that probably answers the other. And maybe if you could just clarify, you mentioned briefly some mitigations to the reserve fund and another mitigation that you would be looking for from the 32 units. Do you have any idea about what that would be at this point, or are you
for example, landscaping. As we're asked to assume the maintenance duties for the new units, we would have to have mitigation of the operating expenses. If there's, all of this is subject to negotiation, but obviously there's a lot of different areas that would have to be discussed. If there's an initial startup, that would be greater impact, ongoing maintenance. There's a lot of things, and I can't, off the top of my head, come up with all of them here.
Is there lighting along the common road?
Yes.
And is that part of a lighting district, or is that?
PG&E owns those, actually.
Okay.
We pay a fee to them.
Okay, so that would be a part of the maintenance fees.
For example.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. Commissioner Cooney. Mr. Walker, would you please?
No, it's okay.
Oh, that's all right.
I now have a copy of his letter. Does the rest of the commission
Yes,
as well?
yes, we
No?
just all received
Can I
one.
move that a copy of Mr. Walker's letter dated September 6, 06 be admitted as part of the record of this hearing?
All right, thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Smizer. Ms. Valero, would you call that into the record, please?
I'll take the motion.
Oh.
Commissioner Boyson?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Smizer?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
All right, thank you. With that, Sylvia Guilford, followed by Diane Simon.
Good morning. I'm a homeowner of North Point for the last 10 years. I concur with Mr. Gunther and Mr. Walker. And on a private note, I am a single parent. I work really hard to hold on to my home and to take on the responsibility of additional people using our property, having to maintain that, our dues increasing for that maintenance would really be a hardship. Also, you've done a walkthrough, you've seen how close that property line is. How do you keep 100, 200 people off our property? You know, do we police them? That's another expense. It just wouldn't be fair. I mean, it wouldn't be fair to the current homeowners. It would disturb our harmonious environment. It just wouldn't be a very comfortable lifestyle. I mean, I'm totally in agreement with having them annexed into our association, but not a separate entity.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your comments. Diane Simon, and then followed by Leo Evans.
Good morning. I am one of the owners in 3B. This was the proposed annexation agreement for 3B and 4. For 3B and 4. At the time, Mr. Wilkes, the prior developer, was going to complete both of these phases. And then due to financial problems at the end of Phase 3B, he was not able to continue and build 4. But the association had taken a vote. This had been presented to the membership. They had taken a vote and approved it. And so the parts of this proposed annexation agreement that pertain to 3B were completed by Mr. Wilkes, and none of them were the swimming pools or the tennis courts or anything that Mr. Evans mentioned in his letter. That was all completed long before Mr. Evans was ever on the scene. He even gave Wilkes credit for completing the 26 units in Phase 2B, which Mr. Wilkes hadn't even heard of North Point at that time. But in the letter to council by Mr. Evans, he says Mr. Wilkes did all that for substantial construction. This, your picture is a little wanting for me. This is the units that will be going in. I live right here. If they...
You live in front of the swimming pool?
No.
No?
Right here. Right there, next to the building. And
Oh,
right next to it.
all right.
If they step off of their property, just one step off, once that's subdivided, they're not on, they're on private property. And that goes to the same, this is our lot 3 over here, where your writing says Phase 3.
Oh, you have to, the light, could you show us with the light?
This is also our property, private property. So if they step off here, they're onto private property. Here and here. It's like, what is it they call it? Something bound.
It's a pocket community.
Yeah, they have no access except on private roads. And I do not feel that this being in such close proximity to the rest of the units was ever meant to be not part of it. I mean, it just doesn't, if you use common sense. You know, how can that be? And then there's like, we have a problem with traffic control. We've got the one big road that zooms in front of the swimming pool. We've got this as a circle, and people just love to come in there and go, hoo, hoo, hoo. Well, we have control over that. We own those roads. And our members, we can fine them $100, you know? We aren't going to have control over, they may be paying for the maintenance of the road, but how do we control this 137 people using our roads? And the last thing I would like to say, I was also in the negotiations, and one of my pet peeves is Common Area Lot 42. There is a recorded easement, as Mr. Gunther said, for Phase 3A, so that those people can, in that 26 units, they can legally enter their units. My little street here with 18 units is also Phase 142, I mean Lot 142. Mr. Wilkes was immediately going to finish this, so he didn't even give an easement to Phase 3B that I live on. And at one of the negotiation meetings, Mr. Evans said to me, because I live on that street, that if he wanted, he could barricade that street because he owned it and we didn't have easement and we couldn't enter our units. So I've not been very happy with this thing for a long time, knowing that I could be locked out of my street. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll go on to the rebuttal. Mr. Evans, would you like to come up?
I didn't make that statement. I'm an attorney, and I don't know where she came up with it from. But I know my rights as to coming on to somebody else's property. I know they have the full right to use it however they want. I have no use of it at all. Now,
What seems to be the problem here, Mr. Evans? Why can't, is it the attorneys talking to attorneys that's creating this problem?
that has a lot to do with it, probably. But the problem is that I'm going to be coming in there with new units. And I don't want to saddle them with the homeowner's expenses. You can't build new and then put them under a homeowners association that's 20-some years old and expect to get anybody that wants to pay for deferred maintenance. And that's what the existing homeowners association is. It's one big deferred maintenance. The roofs are bad, the decks are bad, the road was never built properly, the swimming pool is in disrepair, and what are they doing? They're only taxing the existing homeowners at somewhere around $200 a month. Well, they're going to have special assessments. What they are doing is they're trying to sell off their open space. They're negotiating at this time with the county. First, they put up part of their open space, 8 acres, right across from them, and they got a buyer for $1.5 million. But then they found out that the county owns the development rights to the property. So now they're talking to the county. I think they want $1.6 million for the property. And they are not concerned with my development. They are, as always, concerned with their development and where they're getting money. So they're either going to be selling or getting special assessments. But as far as me developing with them, with the way they've managed their property through the years, it's blocked every other developer before me. If you had seen the list, Mr. Gunther was at the meeting with me, but he never remembered negotiating, or being there, I guess. But I was there, and there were 3 or 4 homeowners there, and their attorney was there. and it was a long list and a lot of money. And the other developers have gone broke even before they get going on it, or they back away from it. And you can't have that handicap and go into building as today, under today's prices. I can negotiate as far as the roads are concerned, and that's a simple matter. And there's no problem with building those, with developing my cost. It's just a third-party beneficiary contract. And the retention basin is in favor of negotiating directly with us and making the homeowners the beneficiary of that contract. So they're not put in a weaker position. They're put in a much stronger position.
Mr. Evans, let me ask you a question. Everything that you say is true, and everything that they said is true, and the concerns on both sides is true, but just regular life, you're going to have people with kids in there. How do you keep them away from playing? Could you put up the other map, please? How do you keep them up from the tennis courts, from the swimming pool, from the basketball courts, from going for a walk in the development? How do you stop them from
Well,
that?
the way they would do that is as they have done in the past. They put a lock on the tennis courts, they put a lock on a swimming pool, and I think they police. They
Well,
police as to who parks.
Why should they have, again, we go to the question, this is their property, why should they have a lock on it?
They already got a lock on it. To stop the public from coming in. That's the way they protect it. They put a lock on it. And they police it. The same way they police parking. If somebody parks overnight in guest parking, they'll get a ticket. They police it. And everybody in that homeowners knows who belongs in the homeowners, and somebody won't come off the street and use that pool. If they sell that property across the street to the county and they put a soccer field, the area will become more congested and there'll be more chance of people coming off the street and using those facilities. But the way it is now, they're remote out there.
I think Mr. Morrow would like to testify on your behalf, still during the rebuttal.
Thank you very much. I think what I'd like to do is just bring this back into focus on the project itself. What Mr. Evans has brought up is in response to comments that were made here. I don't know if that's productive in moving this planning commission forward to a decision at this point. What I'd like to do is focus you on the conditions of approval, condition 13, and condition number 32. These are the two conditions that talk about homeowners association responsibilities for the 32 units and how those would be required prior to development of the project. One of them refers to how the association would be, what the responsibilities of the association would be, and the establishing the pro rata requirements for the off-site improvements. And condition 32 just is in recognition of that the common area would be held in some kind of a nonprofit, i.e. homeowners association entity. The staff was very good with the help of Marianne, the county council, to craft the condition number 13. And it talks about the homeowners association and the responsibilities. Our goal here today is to get this project approved so we can move on. What I would like to suggest is maybe putting in a added phrase at the end of condition 13 that allows for other options for a homeowners association. That leaves the table, the negotiating table with parity, starting at ground zero. We have the option to create a homeowners association, whether it's independent of the existing homeowners association, or it may be a master association with the two subsets. But we're down to the discussion of the association, and that's not going to be resolved today. So I hope that with the spirit of understanding the age of this project, the baseline environmental analysis that has occurred for multiple years, And the negotiations that have gone on with the county staff and the conditions of approval, that if we can allow the approval of this project to move forward here today, establish another 5-year window for this 32 units, because that's how long it takes for development plan lasts. Hopefully between now and then, we will have resolution on the HOA issue and these units will be built.
All right.
Does that focus it down to the essence of where we are today?
Sounds reasonable. We're going to listen to council in
Okay.
a minute.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we listen to county council, would you like to take a 5-minute break? All right, well, planning commission will take a short 5-minute break. Get a Coke and something, and we'll get started here. Commissioner Boyson.
I just want to throw out one more thought, and I guess I'm kind of asking the question. I'd like to have maybe county council or staff comment. We don't have the benefit of the CC&Rs in front of us and how the original homeowner association was established. We're approving this because there are vested rights on, or we're being asked to approve this because we have a vested right on 32 individual lots that just happen to be on this parcel. Every subdivision that I've ever been involved in that had a homeowner association, when the homeowner association was formed, the homeowner association dues went with each lot. And whether you built or not, you were paying dues. And one of the things that this did was to encourage people, especially on a lot sale subdivision, was encourage people to build quicker so they could, utilize their. This obviously wasn't done here, and it is a mess. And I guess I'm asking council, isn't this the normal practice? When a homeowner association is set up and when staff is reviewing and approving CC&Rs, they're reviewing this. Hopefully we're learning something from this, at least for future. That Ms. Slutsky, I don't know. Do you want to comment on that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Boyson, there have been so few phased subdivisions or common interest development subdivisions particularly, that no, I don't think we have really come upon this situation before. When we look at the CC&Rs, generally they provide for annexation within them, but it's nothing I've really looked at closely. Certainly I'm going to look at it more closely now. I hope I don't see this again, however.
Well,
there aren't any vested rights. I just wanted to clarify that certain rights may have been established, but they weren't vested rights because they haven't gotten any building permits yet.
I'm sorry. I thought they do have 32 legal lots.
They do have one lot with 32 recorded units on there for a condominium development. But in order to effectuate that, they need this development plan.
I see.
They need the building permits that would implement the development plan.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Commissioner Smizer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also am going to have a question for County Council. We're the inheritors, I guess, of a precondition that never was actualized, that now staff has returned and determined that we didn't need that precondition. And the precondition I'm speaking of is the annexation. I'm going to guess that there were a lot of good reasons why that annexation condition was in there. I'm going to guess that it was in there because the prior commission was trying to avoid what we're doing right here today. And so I'm wondering if the problem with a precondition is that it puts a gun to the head of the developer, in a sense. It puts a lot of power in the hand of the association if it's a condition for the development to go forward. It can be abused. On the other hand, I think that from what we're hearing, if you don't have some mechanism by which you put all parties in the same room and they hash out their agreement or disagreements and come up with a agreement that will work for everyone, I'm not sure that's in the best interest either. I'm looking at this as a mediator, professional mediator. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this is just working its way to a civil suit, and it's already been discussed here. And I don't want to encourage that. I'd like to have some way of putting the groups together, maybe as a condition, whereby they will, and I don't want to get too specific by this, but some kind of condition where we put the two groups together and we require a meeting, maybe require that it be mediated, something that would effectuate it. I'm hearing from both sides that they're willing to do that, and so I'm turning to you. Help me. Can't this be done?
They say, well, the homeowners association, the existing one, says that they are willing to work on some solution. Maybe, I don't know if DRE does this, but they maybe DRE could actually, maybe they would be available to sit with the attorneys and the applicants or the representatives of
I guess my question is not so much the process, but could we add that as a condition to 13, which is talking about the homeowners association, creation of a homeowners association?
Mr. Apple has already covered that, and he's modified condition 13 to reflect that.
Oh, good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So you may want to
if like we could.
I'm not sure it gets to what you want.
Okay.
Commissioner Smizer.
Thank you.
Read the language.
Commissioner Smizer will just read what we've suggested hearing from what everyone's been talking about. Condition 13 would be revised as follows. It would say, prior to land use clearance of the development plan, the applicant shall form a new homeowners association, annex into the existing homeowners association, or form a master HOA. And then it continues from that point. So that leaves the three different options open. Basically the original one, a new one, or some combination with this master that has been discussed this morning. And all of those would obviously take negotiation and work on both parts, but by having the condition amended that way, it allows them full flexibility to work at any of those angles.
Commissioner Smizer?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm wondering if there's any way to even strengthen that a bit more. And because what I don't want to see is, I don't want this to come back 4 years from now, another commission, and they still haven't worked out how the HOA is going to be handled. So could we include some kind of mitigation clause, some kind of a clause in here that would require mediation if the parties cannot come to an agreement?
I'll have to look to council on that. I don't think we've done that before, so this is new territory.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Smizer, I think in terms of that formal mediation procedures that are available for land use issues, I'm not that familiar with it. I had thought it was a voluntary program, or I thought mediation was voluntary. So,
what my experience is that it is voluntary, but it can be agreed by the parties to enter into it, and once they make that agreement, if the parties agreed that they would move forward, then it becomes a requirement. So I guess what I'm wondering is, number one, whether the parties, since we have them here, would be willing to enter into an agreement that should they not be able to come to an agreement by their normal means, that they would be willing to enter into some sort of either a binding arbitration or a binding mediation.
Counsel?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Smizer, I think that's a good idea, but I don't think we could put that on the project conditions, because that would be a condition for Mr. Evans only. That would be,
Hold for a second.
it would be a little tricky, I think, on the development plan.
All right.
It could be, you might be able, if Mr. Evans agreed to seek mediation with the homeowners association, you could put in your conditions of approval that the applicant shall seek mediation with the existing homeowners association, because that would just be as to Mr. Evans, and it would bind him as per his agreement.
Thank you. Commissioner Boyce. Oh, Commissioner Boyson, you have a comment.
Well, my only comment, the language that we've added to 13, as I listen to those languages, it sounds to me like we're just giving Mr. Evans 2 more options. I mean, we're already saying he's got to have the HOA, and now we're saying, well, or you could do this, or, you know, masters. I'm not comfortable that that solves the problem. You know, how we get around this, obviously, Mr. Evans shouldn't be responsible for previous construction defects, but by the same token, you know, he is going to impact the use. I mean, it shouldn't be up to North Point to have to increase their policing of the common amenities just because we got 32 more. We got a mess here, and you know, we're trying to negotiate with one half of the negotiation team, or we're trying to negotiate, and we only have a cudgel over one half of the negotiation team. So. I don't know where we go from here, but the language I saw in 13 didn't do it for me.
Commissioner Boyson, you're right. You know, Mr. Evans brought out that there's old roofs, the buildings need paint, and the pool needs rework. But then he doesn't have those things like the amenities, like the swimming pool, the volleyball court, the basketball court. So it's a give and take type thing. And I think there should be, you know, one has something the other doesn't have. It may not be in the best shape, but the other one doesn't have it at all. And his people are going to want to go over there, and it's common sense to find a way to work this together. Now, it seems to me like the approach that we came in here, Mr. Evans's legal counsel is very well said and speaks of the law and how he interprets it, and it's black and white of what he can do. The people from North Point also have their attorney here, and he understands, and he says that isn't the case. This is the case. And it seems to me that the softest approaches I saw here was Mr. Walker and Ms. Tamura. I think they may be able to, without the attorneys, be able to work out what a common sense approach is in non-legal terminology. You know, get away from the ipso facto dialogue and start talking about how it affects the person living there who has a unit there, and the new person coming in who wants to get a unit. How could we work together? I know that this is old, but I want to use that amenity, and we know we're going to use it. We know that the people in the 32 units are going to go for the walk in around the existing North Point because it's beautiful. All the trees around there, it's gorgeous. It's a wonderful place to go for a walk. And they have very nice parking. They have extra parking for visitors. There aren't any cars in the driveways. Maybe it needs a 2-inch overlay every so often, but I'll tell you, it's a beautiful place. It's just, so it's got to be a give and take. And if you're not going to give and take, you're not going to have a project. So you better start thinking how you can work this together. Mr. Mora.
Yes, thank you very much, Commissioner Valencia, Chair. And that's why the wording that we talked about during the break seemed appropriate for our side of the table. There was some indication from the other side that that was appropriate. Basically, it brings us to the table. They have an existing project, and we have an approved project. Now we can negotiate on all the bits and pieces. Previous negotiations were somewhat difficult because the Planning Commission sent us back. They had an approved project. We didn't have anything. And so the requirement was we had to negotiate with the HOA, and some negotiations got a little difficult there. I think what helps bring us all to the table equally is an existing project with their amenities, an approved project with the amenities from Mr. Evans' site, and then the condition is an agreement has to be done before those first 32 units are built. And that's not, in the end, that's not your job. It's because that's a whole other set of law, and if there's mitigation or negotiations that have to occur, mediation, there's a whole set of other law that comes into place.
But we're
And
not
so
going to approve a project that's going to create a problem on an existing
there's
project.
an existing problem already existing right now, and what I'm asking this planning commission is to rely on the existing HOA and the owner with this set of conditions go forth and solve the problem.
Okay.
Because your body in some ways can't solve this problem. And that's why
Hold that thought for a second.
that's why we're asking for these changes to that condition.
Commissioner Cooney.
Mr. Chair, I have a lot of respect for Ms. Tamura, and I know she understands these issues very well, but as I come to these homeowner problems, and I should emphasize, first of all, that I think the attorneys are very useful, necessary parts of any agreement, and it's my experience with mediation that attorneys facilitate rather than hamper the discussion. So I don't want the commission's suggestion to be that attorneys don't have a place here. They do. They're vital, and the attorneys that represent the various parties would be the leaders of any discussion. Secondly, I think we're not ready to take action on this project today, despite your comments to the contrary. I really think that we have an internal problem within our process that we have before us bits and pieces of an environmental record, and we're being asked to make a serious decision based on that environmental record. And I really don't think we can do that today. I'm not going to dictate to our staff how we solve it, but I think we need some environmental document, even an addendum, and then we as commissioners need to have the full environmental impact report available to us, because the first thing we're asked by staff to do if we approve this project is to accept the environmental impact report 78 EIR 9 and supplemental document 92 SD2 as adequate for this project. We don't have those things. We haven't had a chance to look at them. So, you know, I certainly think that Ms. Slutsky agrees with me, but if she doesn't, she can say so. I think we need a timeout on this project, and I think that it would be appropriate if, when it comes back with our correct environmental basis, we have some kind of agreement or a roadmap of how an agreement is going to be reached on these difficult matters. So that's my suggestion. It's different than yours, but I'd like to get to where you want to be with the record intact, so that that we feel we've done our job.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyson.
Yeah, I'm still thinking over Commissioner Cooney's idea of a new environmental document. I'm not sure that I need to go there. If one point, and having gone past that age of historical significance, I did forget one other point that I did want to make when I was dressing before, and that is that we also have to consider from the homeowner association side that when these amenities were put in, whether they were the roads, whether they were pools, tennis courts, everything, they were put in with the idea of a build-out. They weren't put in just because 107 people were going to be there. I mean, so certain commitments were made in that original homeowner association. Again, that's where we kind of come up with that idea that, you know, even if the lot sits vacant, you still pay your dues. But in any event, I just wanted to bring that out. But if what Ms. Tamura is suggesting, that we put a condition in there that an agreement, you know, prior to recordation, an agreement will be entered into between the current homeowner association and the developer. You know, I don't know, Ms. Slutsky, if we could come up with some sort of language like that, but that would certainly give me a lot more comfort in going forward with this project.
Commissioner Smizer.
I wonder if I can just ask, when you say agreement, just for clarification, and then I have a point after that, but just for clarification, are you talking about an agreement with the existing HOA for annexation?
Whatever, an agreement that would be signed off by the current HOA, that they are satisfied that they are receiving a proper compensation for the increased utilization of this.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, first I want to thank my fellow attorney here for defending attorneys in general, and appropriately said. You know, I think we can be helpful at times. But I also look at this and I see that I think I'm looking at it and thinking that it would be better if you had one association rather than multiple associations. I just see lots of problems with multiple associations, and I think if we encourage that, we're sending these folks into, you know, war that's going to continue on. I guess I also understand that when you have that these things need to be fair. Mr. Evans, the applicant, has indicated, you know, which would be reasonable. It's a 20-year-old project. The garage doors probably need to be changed. The roofs may need work. All of the exterior that the association is likely in charge of will need to be kept up. And so then you have a brand new unit. And I guess it's unfortunate that we're in a situation where there's not a whole lot of good law available to us. Maybe that's a good thing that other projects haven't gone through this kind of a process. They've all been somewhat developed at the same time, probably for the very reason that you've indicated, and that is that most of the time the units, you're ending up paying your fair share along the way. But it'd be too much to saddle a new homeowner with all the past responsibilities. It's probably also unfair to charge a new homeowner assessments that are likely to come down the road. And I say this having having owned condos and owning one now. You know, then they need a new fence and you get a $1,000 assessment. If you put a new owner into one of those new units and then the first month they get a letter that says there'll be a $1,000 assessment for the fencing, they're going to say, what? This is I just bought a brand new home. Why am I being asked to pay for $1,000? So all of those things are going to have to be worked out if you're going to have one association. And I think that that's probably what has been the problem in the past. I still think that one association is better. And I think that you can work through these things. I know you can. There are ways of doing this. So I'm unhappy with the language changes because, again, it keeps you going down the path of, if we can't make a deal, what we'll do is we'll just pull out and make another association. I don't think that's going to be helpful. I think what you're going to end up with is a lawsuit down the road. And I hate to encourage that by what action we might do. I would agree with Mr. Cooney Commissioner Cooney in that I don't think we need a new document. I agree with both. I don't think we need a new environmental document, but I would like to see the existing one, and I haven't seen it. So I think it should be a part of our package. And so I think we're probably just a couple weeks off, but I guess what I'm asking is that I'd be asking the applicant to get together with the homeowners association and see if you can't make some, now that you have a willing homeowners association, see if you can't make some inroads to working out some of these questions. If not, I think when it does come back, if we choose to have it come back, I think my feeling is going to be that there needs to be some kind of language in here that if the groups cannot agree, that we send them to some sort of a binding arbitration or binding mediation as a part of the requirements. And I say that not because I don't think this applicant needs to have this project done in a timely manner. I think they do, and I think you've waited a long time to get this done, and I think so has the rest of the people who live in this community. But I just don't want it to get protracted, and if the track record is that we haven't been able to come together on an agreement, I want to make sure that that agreement happens, and that's kind of where I'm at on this.
Thank you very much, Commissioner
Mr. Chair.
Smizer. Yes.
Might I say something? If there is going to be a continuance, I haven't spoken to the attorneys at DRE in quite a while, and I can call them and see if they have some suggestions. I'm sure they have run into this in the past, and I can talk to them again.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Mora, did you want to say a couple of words in closing?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, we were hoping for forward motion today. We know that staff has worked diligently on this proposal, and there have been a lot of issues resolved. The issue is the HOA, and I understand the concerns that were raised here. Part of the reason why this project wasn't built in the past was economics. Part of the reason that some of the units were built because they did have a successful negotiation with the Homeowners Association. I think we're almost there. The only reason we had difficult the last time is because the Planning Commission sent us back prior to an approval to negotiate an HOA agreement, and that put us in a very awkward negotiating position. We agree with the conditions as proposed by staff, and we hope that we could move forward with that condition because it puts us at parity with the Homeowners Association. That's my final statement, and we'll listen to what the Planning Commission has to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Boyson.
Yeah, and I think Ms. Lutsky has hit on a key here to that we need to contact the Department of Real Estate. And you might even want to work with Mr. Mora and whoever they're going to be, their agent that they're going to be dealing with as they prepare their documents for Department of Real Estate, and get both sides of the story so we can both get the advocate as well. But I'm sure that this has come up. I mean, we're not rocket science here. This has got to be something that's happened. As Mr. Gunther pointed out, Oak Shore had this, and they ended up with this master agreement and sub-agreements, and hopefully it can be done, as Commissioner Smizer has so eloquently pointed out, that this needs to be one agreement. It's not that big of a community, and it should all be one. And, if there's some way that these homeowners can pay a different fee than the other homeowner association and isolate them by, because of their phase or whatever, something's got to be able to be accomplished here.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, we're going to close the public hearing, bring it back. Did the staff want to comment on any of the things before we bring it back to the commission? Mr. Apple, Mr. Sorg, I'll bring it back to the commission. It looks like we do have quite a concern about mostly the HOA, not the project itself, and there is a minor concern about some documentation. So I'm going to recommend, this is a 4th District item, I'm going to recommend that we bring this back on 11 October, that we continue this project. Could I have a motion to that effect, please?
Mr. Chair, can I just
Yes.
add to that motion that we need to see those environmental documents when
Yes.
we... Okay.
Fine.
Then I'll second it.
All right, thank you.
I'll also move, yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Moved and second. Ms. Mendoza, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Boyson?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Smizer?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
All right, thank you. That concludes item number 1. And Smara, we only have 10 minutes before lunch. Should we come after 1? All right, well, commission is going to break for lunch. We'll be back at 1 o'clock. After lunch, and today is the 13th of September, and we're at the Betaravia Government Center. County Council would like to make an announcement, or, yes?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, for the next item, Mary Pat Berry of our office is counsel for that project, and if there are any questions, she'll be available by remote testimony.
All right, thank you. Ms. Meester?
Mr. Chair, just wanted to make an announcement following up from your questions this morning about the September 6th hearing. Yes, indeed, the September 6th hearing was broadcast with no sound. On both rebroadcasts, I mean. And so tomorrow, there will be a rebroadcast of your September 6th meeting at 9 a.m. and at 8:30 p.m. There was some technical glitch, which I understand is more complex than any of us care to know about, and so they're going to rebroadcast again.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, we'll go on to the SMARA ordinance amendments. Ms. Mendoza, could you read that into the record, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department for the County Planning Commission to consider and make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors regarding 06 ORD 13 and to accept the exemption pursuant to Section 15061B3 of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Thank you. Mr. Appel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I'll be making the presentation today, but as Council mentioned, Mary Pat Berry, Council will be in Santa Barbara if there are any legal questions on what we've done, and also David Vianello, our North County Grading Inspector, is here. We also have a few members from our committee that had been formed for this, and they may be speaking later, but just wanted to recognize them. Just as a way of background, a hearing was conducted by the Board of Supervisors on appeal of a stop work order for a large soil export operation in the Santa Maria Valley. And at that hearing, the board agreed with staff that the soil export was a violation of SMARA, and they upheld the stop work order. But at the same time, they were concerned about what they felt was a legitimate operation and wanted to help the farmer in this case and any other farmers in the county that might be in the same situation. So the board directed us to expedite the processing of a revision to our SMARA procedures. So we began by putting together a streamlining committee, and we had a number of interested people that agreed to be on the committee. As you can see the list here, we had some surface mining operators, some of those that had agricultural interests, the trucking firms, the Ag Commissioner's Office, County Council, and then Planning and Development. It should be noted that this ordinance amendment is for the inland area only. It's not going to be affecting the coastal lands within the county. And during the time that we met as a group, we did a number of things. We did a couple revisions of the ordinance. In fact, I gave you this morning a copy of a revised Exhibit D, which will, I had the wrong copy in there, and as you can see from the copy you had, we were still talking about a double hearing process and using the Planning Commission, and what we've ended up with now is a much more streamlined process with a one trip to the zoning administrator. So the revised Exhibit D reflects that. Also, we were able to take a look at the application form, which was 26 pages long, and because this is a grading permit by nature, we were able to cut out a lot of the extra information that wasn't needed. There's basically no processing or crushing or sorting or any of the things that you would have that might make this more of an industrial type of a process and thereby require additional information in the application. So we were able to get it down to a 12-page application. And then just like to publicly thank those committee members for their assistance. We met probably 3-4 times during this process, and we had some very good discussions about the process. And so I believe what we have before you today is a compilation of all those efforts from the various committee members. The draft ordinance was reviewed by a wide variety of people. First, the streamlining committee, then the existing mining operators. We've got a list of all the mines in the county and their operators because we do need to be in touch with them for doing annual inspections. And so we sent out a copy of the draft ordinance. And I have called and talked to several of the members that basically have supported the amendment. I got an email this morning from Hanson from Steve Zacks, their environmental manager, and he also supports the process, what we're doing. So We basically have tried to bring something to you that has been accepted by a wide variety of people, both the mining operators who would be most affected by this or impacted by this because of basically competing business interests and stuff, and then by those who would actually be using the ordinance. The objective in our process, primary objective, is to improve the quality of agricultural land. That was how we got into this in the first place. The operation that ended up getting the stop work order was in the process of removing large amounts of soil, which was causing problems in the way that the property was being farmed, and the end product was going to be a much more consolidated soil material, which was going to be easier to farm and more uniform in its soil strata. We also, during this process, had an application that came in for an operation in the Lompoc Valley. And that was a similar situation where they wanted to improve the quality of some agricultural land, and it would have resulted in the export of about 70,000 cubic yards of soil from the property. So the idea behind this, and our primary focus has been to really look how we can improve the agricultural land, recognizing that because of the export, it triggered the surface mining regulations, and because of that, seeing what we could do to try to make the process easier and take less time. We also wanted to avoid the long-term competition with the existing mining operations, where some operators have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, up to over $1 million, for their permits and their special studies that had to be done. And so we're sensitive to that, and that's why I was glad that we had a couple of the mining operators on our committee through the process. But the bottom line is that what we are looking at, the physical movement of the soil from these properties, is going to be effectuated through what would look like a grading plan, a grading permit. You're going to have existing contours, you're going to have finished contours. And it will not involve the technical difficulties that we've had in reviewing standard or typical reclamation plans. For instance, when they're in a riverbed, going down where you might be hitting groundwater or sensitive species. So many of the issues that we have in a normal reclamation plan and a mining permit are just not part of the process here. We're basically looking at a grading permit that's going to change the contour and basically flatten out agricultural land. And in doing all of this, we too just want to mention that we are still in compliance with the state and the local ordinances, and so that was important that we made this all work that way as well. So to better appreciate the proposed process, I just wanted to go over quickly the current SMAR process, which is on the overhead now. The submittal of a major CUP and a reclamation plan are the minimum requirements for processing of a mining operation. We have everything from hard rock operations up in the Tepiscay area to sand and gravel in some of the San Ynez, Santa Maria valleys. And then we have a lot of river mining that's aggregate material that we get either Cuyama Valley, Santa Maria Valley, and San Ynez. All of those have required major conditional use permits and reclamation plans, as well as financial assurances. When we take the application in, we distribute it to the normal departments that will get this through the county, and at the same time we send off a copy to OMR, the Office of Mine Reclamation, where they have technical staff that do the review for us, because we aren't miners and we aren't engineers, and so we rely on their expertise, and they've been very good over the years of giving us just straightforward feedback on these operations. And so that's the current process of sending that out, and then getting comments back from them, making any changes necessary. And once that's done, we've deemed the project complete, and then begin our CEQA process, which generally results in either a negative declaration or an EIR for the current mining operations. We've not had any mining operations that have been exempt. I would guess 80 to 90% of them have been able to be done with a negative declaration or mitigated ND. So that's the normal process. Once the CEQA process is completed, then a staff report is prepared. Planning Commission holds its hearing, and takes conceptual review, approval of it, and then is returned to OMR, which is a requirement of SMARA for them to, once we've said we have a certified reclamation plan, they take final action saying they agree, or if they don't agree, they send us comments on how they feel we should make further changes. Also, financial assurance, basically a bond, is reviewed by the staff of the mining board. It's not through OMR. It's kind of an interesting setup. And they are the ones who have to look at the financial assurance to determine that it's adequate. And then they're allowed 45 days for review, where OMR is allowed 30 days. And then once we receive that back, we reschedule it to the commission and take final action on it. And in general, if it's a negative declaration, it's running around 290 days for the process. Under the streamlined process, the newer application will make things considerably easier for the applicant to put together. But what we are asking is that before they even submit their application, they complete it and then they set up a preliminary meeting with staff to go over it, because we want to make sure that when they submit that we'll have everything we need to be able to deem it complete. We believe that they're simple enough that we will be able to look at all the issues and be able to make any changes necessary before it comes in. So that's something we aren't doing now with the current reclamation plan, but it's just because these are that much simpler, we're going to try to do that. Again, it should be noted that there's no processing of the materials on the property, there's no crushing, there's no grinding or sorting. This is basically an operation where topsoil would be removed, set aside on the property. They would take the subsoil, transport that off-site for whatever purpose it was, and then replace the topsoil and then resume or begin farming. So that's kind of how that would work. So once an application comes in, and we felt that it met all the tests of SMARA, we would then submit it to OMR for their review and comment, saying that we believe that we could certify that this application met all the minimum requirements for SMARA. While that was out, we would also do any environmental review as necessary. There is the possibility, because of the minor nature of these applications, that it could be exempt, but we're not saying for sure it's exempt. We're just saying we're going to do CEQA review. It may still need an ND. It may need an EIR, depending on volumes, and that volume is another issue we need to talk about later on. But for right now, we would conduct environmental review. We'd get our comments back from the state, and then we'd prepare a staff report, and that would go to the zoning administrator for hearing. And we're indicating that the time now, based on this revised Exhibit D that you have, the total time would be anywhere from 110 to 180 days. So there'd be a considerable savings over what we've got. And one of the reasons for that, too, is just because it's still fairly easy to get on a zoning administrator agenda. At this point, well, you've seen your projection report. Unless we had some special hearings, it would probably be November or December before if one was ready right now, that it would be able to be heard by your commission. So that was one of the problems we said in looking at the old system, is that it was a longer process. It was a double process of going to the commission. And so in the way we rewrote it, we still made all the provisions for SMARA. We're still complying with all of the state and local rules, but at the same time we were able to shorten the processing time. So within the ordinance revisions, there were very few that actually were needed to make this process work. Now, when you had your meeting last week on Thursday, you looked at a large package, the entire ZORP package, and that contained a number of changes to SMARA, which we're not going to discuss today because those were part of the bigger package. All we're looking at is this portion within that ordinance of Exhibit C that was shaded gray. Those are the changes that we're making as a result of the board's direction to streamline this process. The other changes were made by staff in an attempt to bring us into compliance with changes in state law, since we hadn't amended our ordinance since '93. So the major change shows up in the Ag 2 zone district, where it says that these minor mining operations can be approved with a minor CUP as opposed to a major CUP. And then we have a definition now that's been added that's called agricultural soil export mining. and it basically has 2 points in there. One of them is that trying to make it very clear that the grading is for agricultural purposes and for improving ag. And then second, there's the item in there that limits the grading to a maximum of 75,000 cubic yards. This was one of our more interesting discussion topics in our committee. That first mine, the one that caused the grading that caused the stop work order, there was a plan to remove upwards of 400,000 cubic yards. So some of the group felt that there should be, a limitation. Others felt there shouldn't be. We have put 75 into this definition so that we have a starting point, something to discuss. And it's really up to your commission as you hear from the people in public or your own deliberations what direction you want this permit to go. The 75,000 came out of the fact that the grading permit that had been submitted for a similar operation in Lompoc, I believe, had been for 70,000 yards, and so we put that number in. But as you can see in the staff report, it identified a total number of truck trips based on the 18 yards of material per load. And so I think what this is all going to boil down to is how much truck traffic are we willing to accept from these operations, if that becomes the limiting factor, then we can certainly change the number, because we haven't identified over what period of time these truckloads are going to occur, if it's just in a month, if it's over a year. And so there's a number of issues that just we couldn't decide, and we thought we would present the package to your commission and then just with general discussion see how you reacted to this, and just if there are additional parameters you want placed on this, we're certainly willing to look at those. And then your Exhibit C that I gave to you today was actually a copy that showed the edits that came out of your meeting from last Thursday, some of the minor changes that had been requested, and so those are shown in the edit mode. So I just wanted you to have that as well. It doesn't affect what we're doing today. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the consistency between the old and the new process. First, from a CEQA standpoint, at first I went into this thinking that these were going to be exempted, but I realized after discussion that they still have the ability to cause impacts, and I think, as I mentioned, traffic is probably the biggest factor here. So I'm not sure that unless it's a really small operation and the routes are very well defined and are out in rural areas, we probably are not going to be looking at an exemption. But we just wanted to say that there's a CEQA process that's possible, and whether it's the streamlined process or the standard process, we have to go through CEQA. We've got to do the right thing, and we have to analyze the impacts. They're going to be analyzed on each individual project, and so that's why we didn't put some specific parameters in other areas, because depending on location of where the source material is and where the end product is going to go, there are a lot of different variables. And so all we're trying to say is that CEQA is going to be done in both processes. And then noticing. The notice right now for the current process is that we would send out a notice document to landowners within 300 feet of the property if we do a negative declaration. And then if there is an identified route that may impact neighborhoods or anything else like that, our noticing goes beyond, and we can actually notice along the route. So we have the ability now to look at a project and see how it might impact and who it might impact, and then expand from what our standard 300-foot list would be. We don't see any difference in doing that for the new project under this streamlined process. We believe that people need to know what's going on in their neighborhood, and so the noticing would be handled the same way. If there was an exemption and it somehow met the test for an exemption, then there'd be no noticing for that, but they would still receive a notice prior to it going to the zoning administrator. So there still will be public notice regardless of the process that we end up using. And then just the recommendations, as shown in the staff report. As you know, this does need to go on to the Board of Supervisors, and so the action that you would take if you were to support this or some version of it, is that you'll be making recommendations to the board for adoption of this ordinance and acceptance of the CEQA exemption. So that concludes presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
What's the minimum trigger to get this going? The minimum trigger that...
Anything over 1,000 yards of export triggers it. Now,
cubic yards.
Cubic yards, yeah. Now, one of the things I didn't mention is that agricultural grading is allowed on any ag parcel, and there are some parameters that you have to follow, but you can do a lot of work on the property, cutting and filling, as long as the material doesn't leave the property and as long as you stay back a certain distance from property lines. If you go deeper than 3 feet, then there are regulations for where you need to have an erosion control permit. But still, it's basically handled with a very ministerial permit, no noticing to neighbors, that sort of thing. So we only got involved in this because there was export of the material. And that's how we found it in the past. I've mentioned that in the past, we have had some administrative practices where we may have found that a farmer was selling material to Caltrans to help do road improvements. And a neighbor might have called to ask us how come there's so many trucks on the road. Then we look into it, find out what's going on. Well, they're almost done, so we basically would say, okay, we'll finish it up, but understand you can't do this without permits. And so we've handled this in kind of an informal way in the past, and in the past have, in a couple occasions, have allowed grading permits to be issued for one-time operations, which we felt passed the spirit and intent of SMARA because it was a one-time operation. It was improving agriculture. But since all of this has happened recently, council has taken another look at it, and they really feel we need to stick to the very specific 1,000 yards or more triggers the need for SMARA. So that's why we're in this situation today. We're looking for a way of streamlining, basically a grading permit, but at the same time protecting the rights of the people where the trucks are going to be going and making sure that we aren't causing any more undue impacts.
Thank you. Commissioner Boyson.
Thank you, Mr. Oppel. And Mr. Chair, this is strictly Ag 2, all
Yes.
classifications of Ag
Yes.
2. We're not going to differentiate between Ag 40 or 100 or...
No, Ag 2 starts at 40 acre
Right.
minimum and goes up to 320, and so it would be all Ag 2 properties.
How about accommodating parcels that are still in 661?
In the past, we have said that if they're, like if it was 100 AG, that's an equivalent parcel. We've done that for the purposes of doing petroleum permitting for the production plants and stuff, and I believe that would still be the case. We can ask Mary Pat if she feels that way. But that seems to have been the standard because...
And I guess my question then is making sure that we wouldn't require them to rezone to...
That's a good question. We've done that in the past when we've had discretionary cases. I don't know if that would be carried through for this. Ms. Black could answer.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Boyson, I think we would encourage rezoning if we could come to resolution as to what that proposed zone should be, because we're in a discretionary hearing context, but we haven't been in a position of requiring it unless a particular use isn't permitted in
I mean, my
the
question on
661
that,
zone.
certainly if you're converting to some sort of operation or something like this, but if it's just merely for pushing dirt around and, you know, you happen to have a source for getting rid of it, and, you know, all of a sudden you add a rezone onto this. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Apple, thank you for that nice explanation, since I had a lot of questions and still have some. If a farmer or landowner applied for this permit, would it be one time only, or could it be done over a period of, could he do it again in, say, 3 or 4 years? The reason I'm asking this question is because when we've looked at Oak Shale Quarry, you know, their permit was for 20,000 cubic yards per year over a certain number of years, and we knew what the impacts were. And as you indicated, they probably paid a lot of money for that permit to do that. And here's a landowner who could do it, come in for the streamlined process this year, and then in 3 years come in for it again, and really sort of subvert what a quarry owner is required to do. So you have sort of different rules for doing this sort of the same thing. So
Yeah.
can you just talk about that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, that is one of the issues that, as I mentioned earlier, that we didn't get into the individual criteria, which are a possibility of adding to the ordinance at this point. To your specific question, could they come in again? Yes. A mining operation identifies an amount of material that they need to move. It identifies an end use, and it identifies a reclamation or a financial assurance to make sure that the property is put back into that end use. Once that's been accomplished, let's say someone has comes in through for this process, and on their property they say they needed to remove 50,000 yards. We could go through that process, and they could be approved, and they could do all the work, and then the land is basically flattened. It would be difficult for them to come to us and say, I want to do it again, and I'm going to create a hole now. I had a hill before, and now I'm going to have a hole. So we wouldn't be able to go that route, because first and foremost, we have to say this is for improving agricultural operations on the property. So.
But it may not be a hill. It may be a certain section of a very large parcel, and then they want to do it in another area. Do this. So that's a problem for me.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, I could certainly foresee that potential. I don't think this process is so easy that people are going to want to go through it again and again and again and again, because they are subject to environmental review, subject to the hearing process, notice, review by the State Mining Board, and I don't think the Mining Board will tolerate this. This is really intended to deal with agricultural soil. It's not competing with other, mining operations that mine hard rock or sand and gravel out of rivers. So it's conceivable, but I really don't think that it's so incentivized that people would want to go through this process over and over again. And as Mr. Apple pointed out, the first and foremost finding is that it's a project that enhances the agricultural potential of the site, and there's a limit to what could be done on sites.
Commissioner Smizer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a couple questions in terms of coordinating with other ordinances. I'm going to ask a series, and I know we have ordinances that cover each one of these: flood control, creation of ponds, farm roads. Are we going to coordinate this ordinance with those ordinances so that we don't create unintended consequences, or be more restrictive in one area and less restrictive in another that doesn't now make any sense?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Smizer, we already coordinate with the other departments, and I believe our ordinances are in complete harmony with the other departments' ordinances. When they write condition letters for our surface mining operations and for the reclamation, they're citing their own ordinances in those cases, and so I don't see that this would change anything in how we currently operate and allowing them full latitude to condition a project. This wouldn't change at all.
And let me ask you then about the export as well, the export of soil. As long as the soil remains on the property owner's property, it wouldn't trigger this. What about property owners that own patchwork quilts of property? That is pretty common in Santa Maria. You can common in the Santa Ynez Valley, where the only division would be the roadway. Is an owner, if he's got one property on one side of the road, he wants to bring the dirt to the other side of the road, is he going to have to get this permit? Separate parcels, but same property owner.
If the road is in fee ownership, we have in the past allowed the material to be moved from the same owner's property to an adjacent
As long as it's
property.
adjacent?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess the trigger is if it's not an adjacent property,
Right.
then it would trigger it?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to make sure that I got a good view of this, because, so really what we're looking at is a football field with 10 yards of the, okay, instead of, I think it's 50 by 100. So help me if I'm wrong, maybe
Rectangles.
40. Yeah, it's a rectangle. So we all know what 100 yards looks like. But instead of it being a square, we're only talking about 10 yards of width, 100 yards of length, 3 feet down.
1,000 cubic yards.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
1,000 cubic yards.
Mhm.
Okay. So I think if you have that picture in your mind, it's easier to see how you could have this process in other areas take place if somebody's got a rolling hill and they want to level it out, and there may not always be a use for that extra dirt, subsoil, to level out another section. I could see, particularly over somebody that has a couple thousand acres, this is something that they may need to do in several places on their property, and probably would enhance the value and the use of the ag properties. One of the things that, depending upon being kind of an ag guy myself, if you're doing row crops, you want it flat, and you want it to be able to bring in the biggest piece of equipment you can. You don't want to have to try and go around hills and any other kind of obstruction that would be in the area. So it seems to make sense.
Mr. Chair, just one point of clarification. That 1,000 cubic yards you helped us all envision, that's just the trigger, but they can go up
Right,
to 80.
right.
Yeah, so just want to make that clear.
Go ahead, Ed. Is that it?
I think that's all for right now. I just wanted to clarify those other issues. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Brown.
Okay, thank you. I want to go back to discussion of your, sort of the sequencing, in that it is possible that if it went to the zoning administrator, and I guess there were no CEQA issues, that only property owners, excuse me, within 300 feet of this property would be notified. Is that,
That's partially correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you
Go
want me to
ahead.
clarify?
Yeah.
Okay. I said that at a minimum, we always do 300 feet around the property.
Right.
But if there are other triggers and other impacts, let's say along a haul route or something along those lines, that we would do the additional noticing. Now, if there isn't CEQA noticing, there still would be the full-on noticing for the zoning administrator
But the
hearing.
zoning administrator is only 300 feet from the property line. It's not necessarily along the haul route.
No, that's the standard. The standard for any noticing is 300 feet for an ND or the public hearing for the discretionary case, and 1,000 feet if it's an EIR. In this case, we're saying we're going beyond that because we feel that there are more people impacted by it.
So in every case, it would be people along the haul route, should that be identified?
If we believe they would be impacted, yes.
Okay. Well, I guess that's my question about the impacts from the trucking, is that you will know, I presume, when they submit their application, how intense the trucking operation will be. It'll be 200 truckloads a day, it'll be 300, it'll be 20, it'll be 1 a day for 3 years. My concern is on the South Coast, where many of the, well, I guess most of the ag sites, you have to go through urban areas to get to a freeway, or I'm thinking of the Goleta foothills, as I explained earlier, where I see these trucks come from the quarry that's off Cathedral Oaks, and I also see them coming to and from farms that are back off of Fairview. I don't know how big the farms are. I think they're ag too, but I think they are ag too. So it's possible that we could have this huge trucking operation for I don't know, whatever period of time, going through the urban area. And I just, I don't know the appropriateness of that. That's my only concern.
Mr. Chair and members of the commission, the noticing for the revised, this streamlined process is exactly the same as the noticing required now. I just want to make that really clear. It would be exactly the same. It's not changed. The decision maker would be changed. That's what's really proposed, is to shift the decision from the planning commission to the zoning administrator, but the noticing would remain the same. And then you would be the appeal body for any decisions
Or the
that
board.
are made. And then to the board.
Yeah. Ms. Black, is there, in this process, I guess it was the zoning administrator, you decided that was a level. Is there a planning director level where this, no, there is none. It's just zoning administrator or planning commission.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we felt in our review that it was important that there be a public hearing on these matters.
All right.
Commissioner Cooney?
Just a question, Mr. Apple, since you and Ms. Black have mentioned environmental review each chance you get, and I appreciate that given earlier hearings today. But looking at the notice of exemption in this case, it refers to all inland and coastal areas excluding Montecito. And I think you said earlier it was not going to apply in the coastal zone area.
That was going to be amended, yes.
Okay.
It just is the inland area.
All right, good. And then, you know, the issue that I guess before us is whether this is too much streamlining or not enough. I think we all agree that we should take a step in the right direction to make it easier, an easier process, a less lengthy process. But should we include a number of cubic feet of dirt to use as a triggering point here, or a maximum point available for this streamlined parcel? I certainly think so. I can't tell you whether 75,000 is the right number or not, but just to leave it open in the ordinance, I think would be not protecting the interests that Commissioner Brown has indicated would be the most impacted in this situation.
Thank you. Commissioner Boyson?
Did we receive feedback from OMR on this?
No, we haven't. Their staff is going through a number of changes right now, and we were told that they would have some time later this month to take a look at this. And so under ideal circumstances, we would have had full feedback from them incorporated into the staff report to bring to you. But when we learned that they were unable to give us feedback until later in September, we wanted to go forward. And then the way the normal process works is that once the ordinance is considered by the board, they take conceptual approval of it, and then we send a cover letter to the state OMR and the mining board and ask them to review them and see if they concur with the changes. Once we hear back, then we can take final action. So there may be a chance that there are some changes that are put on this, and we'll obviously work with them as soon as we can, but at this point they just don't have the time or the manpower to review the things for us before we got here today.
And do we have any history with any other counties on what they do? Or
In talking to some of the senior staff at OMR, we are unique in trying to do this. I think everyone else either ignores the agricultural grading that's going on, but no one has a streamlined process that tries to fix this particular problem. Now, in the past, the state has been very happy with what we've done from a SMARA standpoint. When we did our revisions in '93, they actually used our ordinance as a model ordinance. So when any agency called in and needed to revise theirs, they would send our package out. So we know that we've done the right thing in the past. It's just that no one has gone this direction before. So we're blazing.
Or it means that we're way too restrictive. Yeah, whatever. Okay.
I have one question before I go on to Commissioner Brown. I was trying to picture this. A football field, assuming it's 100 yards, and I don't know if it's 50, assume it's 50 wide, maybe it's less, 50, 15 feet deep. That is the maximum 75,000 cubic yards, right? That's what it is.
Mr. Vianello probably has a calculator with him and
Oh, I
is
just
figuring
did
it
it
out
in my
as we
head.
speak. Yeah.
45 feet deep.
No.
15 yards deep.
No, 15 feet deep, 15 feet. See, square footage, cubic foot is 3 times length times width times height. So it would be you have 5,000 square foot surface area.
Yeah.
Bringing it up 3 feet, 3 times 5,000
Yeah,
is
you have to divide by
15,000.
27 though.
And
You have to divide by 27 and put it in cubic yards. He just did that and he says it's 15 feet for 25,000 cubic yards. So it'd be 45 feet.
Right. 1 acre, 1 foot. 1 foot over.
cubic yards.
Yeah, you have to do the division by 27 to go from the square feet to the cubic yards. And so,
Oh, that's right,
yeah,
that's right, I'm sorry, sorry,
So it
okay.
would be 45 feet deep over a football field for 75,000 yards.
Okay.
But most of these most of these agricultural parcels are well exceed 100 acres, and I think we looked at the numbers, and Mr. Vianello, it was 1 foot over 100 acres.
50.
Well, let's put it this way. It's
Why don't you come up?
It's 1 foot over 50.
I'm Dave Vianello, Santa Barbara County Grading Inspector. Mr. Chair, Mr. Valencia, if you look at a 1 acre parcel, it's approximately 0.7 feet or 6.1 inches down to create 1,000 yards. So that's kind of how we work. Basically, 1 acre equal at 0.7 feet down is 1,000 cubic yards. So what was your question exactly?
No, it's just, I was trying to picture the 75,000.
Okay.
The 75,000
Football field
cubic yards.
Yeah,
A
that's
football field.
That roughly would be 45 feet deep. That's quite a pit. Correct.
And that's the massive dirt that it would take.
That would be the mass of dirt. You're taking a big cube out of the field, basically.
That's right, you're into, wait a minute, is the 75,000 cubic yards or cubic feet?
Cubic yards.
Okay.
A cubic yard is 3 feet by 3 feet
Right,
by 3 feet.
27.
Cubic
Right.
feet, correct.
Okay, who had the next question? Commissioner Brown?
I guess I did. I really, I think for me, there's a lot of uncertainties in this, and I understand the need for grading on ag land, but I'm not totally sure that this is a number that, because of the intensity of trucking, depending upon over what period of time it may occur, is really appropriate. Before I could vote on this, I would really like to see the folks at the state comment on what our proposal is, to see whether or not they have any suggestions or recommendations.
Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Brown, just a couple of things to point out. First of all, the state does know that we're working on this because we consulted with them when we were dealing with the SUDI matter on appeal at the board, and I believe they even attended a conference call when we first kicked off this meeting. I don't believe their concern is that they're concerned at all about the trigger that we pick. It's really their involvement and at what stage in the process they become involved and how they review financial assurances. So I don't think they're going to help us with the trigger or the cap. Second point is these are still conditional use permits. So while somebody could apply for up to 75,000 cubic yards of movement of material under this provision and not go the full SMARA route, it's no guarantee that they'll receive that level if it doesn't make sense, or the zoning administrator, Board of Supervisors on appeal could require that they spread their truck trips out. There are a number of things that could be done on an individual permit basis to address specific concerns that a single case might raise. But it's hard to anticipate all of those situations. That's why this is a conditional use permit, because it's very site-specific.
It seems to me that it's mostly, just from your description, will be handled by staff, with staff solely making the judgment based upon the application. And I wouldn't imagine that an applicant would say, I want to move 50,000 cubic yards, and the staff saying, no, it's too much. So I have problems with that because I think that the staff will respond to what the applicant wants to do and say, and try to affect a process which is going to be streamlined, but which may have some environmental effects which are unintended and unanticipated based upon those truck trips. So that's what it's, for me, that I don't sort of have that clarity or that certainty in that process.
Well, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, it would be in a public hearing. And I can assure you, and I've seen a number of zoning administrator hearings, that when people come and they express concerns about projects, the zoning administrator considers those and tries to factor that into the findings that he or she needs to make with regard to compatibility with the neighborhood. So I don't think it's just a staff level, a traditional staff level permit like a land use permit where the request is easily accommodated. I think the public hearing process does provide input that's valuable in the decision-making process.
Commissioner Boyson.
And I think another point on this too is, I mean, we're doing this in the county of Santa Barbara, but when we grade a subdivision or something, I mean, we're moving dirt all over the place, and we could be moving 75,000 yards. It's just that this happens to be in agriculture.
And Mr. Chair, that's how most of the current operations that have occurred on agriculture have occurred to date, is they've supported some other discretionary project that you've reviewed. And so that's really how we've gotten to most of the permits that we've seen on agricultural lands.
All right, thank you. All right, Commissioner Smyser.
I just wanted to ask, how, I mean, it doesn't sound like we've had that many of these kinds of projects come through for review. I mean, we've had one that caused us to say, we need to actually think about this. But how many projects like this have come as you look back over the last several years? How many of these kinds of projects do we get?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Smyser, we're guessing maybe 4 or 5 that we've seen in the history of, issuing permits for this kind of a thing. So really, not that many at all.
Yeah, because my thinking about this is that most of the time this happens in a pretty new ag operation, or you're going to change what you're doing on the ag land. So most of our ag lands have already been in production. It's going to be a rare situation where you're going to end up taking, by the way, just 0.7 feet, 6.5 inches, about.
It's actually 8 inches.
That you move a lot of dirt in an ag operation without too much thinking about it, and so it really doesn't surprise me at all that you might get for a new ag operation or for an ag operation that was changing what they were doing, and they had 1,000 acres. That's 100,000 right there. I understand that you're trying, and what I'm seeing in this is that why we're discussing this is that somehow someone that's got an ag operation that's 4 or 5 a year that we're dealing with, somebody gets linked up with someone that needs some fill in not an ag project. More likely than not, it's in a development project, whoever's. And it could even be a county project for that matter, and they get linked up, and all of a sudden we need some fill, and we need it nearby. We'd prefer to get it from the county rather than 2 or 3 counties away, and so we find out that some ag person is wanting to make a change or put a vineyard in or something, whatever, and they've got some potential fill. So, I don't know, it doesn't sound like it's something that is going to be a situation where you're going to have that much. Once you've got an established ag operation, it's not really going to be the case where you're going to end up being able to do this. I mean, I understand what I don't see it as a money maker. In other words, this is not going to be something that
No, they're not going to repeat time and
yeah,
time
I just don't
again.
see that it's going to be
probably a
repeated time and time again. It's going to be kind of a one-time thing, or maybe somebody's going to change their ag operation, and it might happen again in 10, 15 years, but not very much, not a whole lot between then.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Brown.
So, to date, your several experiences have been that the soil was exported for, not because the farmer was trying to level land, but because it was being used for development projects. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, no, in fact, each one of them, we identified some agricultural improvement on the property. It usually was being able to flatten out an area. Some actually had received material from offsite to fill gullies and that sort of thing to make it more productive. But the ones where it was exported, I think 2 or 3 of them were for Caltrans projects. 1 or 2 were for just residential projects where they just needed fill material.
So it wasn't solely for the ag property. It was because other people wanted the soil, and so they took it from their land. So it was for development projects. It wasn't for ag.
No, the material that was removed from the property went for, in each case, a non-agricultural improvement, but there was ag improvement as a result of the removal of the material.
Commissioner Boyson.
Well, I think this is kind of like that old story, luck is when opportunity meets preparedness, and it's just, you know, the guy would certainly like to have flatter land to farm, but he's not going to go to the expense of dragging it off site, and all of a sudden he's got somebody to pay for it or even give him a couple of nickels to do it. And so, I mean, it's the chicken and the egg thing. I think you got to have them both. So. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to open the public hearing. Mr. Gibbons? I almost thought you weren't going to get a chance to say something here.
It's actually nice to hear the discussion. It would have been nice to have had all of you in the meetings with us. It would have been actually very productive. I am Tom Gibbons, and I'm in support of this action, not because I think it's the way to do it. It's the only thing that came out of the meeting. And no disrespect meant that's where we ended up. Most of you don't have a clue on how much 100,000 yards is. You know, in our farming operation, we move hundreds of thousands of yards a month on site. We're a valley of, we used to be a valley of farms. Pretty soon we're going to look like the Goleta Valley, but we move dirt everywhere. And as we look at Los Angeles, where the mines used to be, they made landfills out of them. Now they're excavating the landfills and filling them with dirt and putting houses in. And when they're hauling dirt from Lancaster to Santa Paula to make asphalt, we need to think about what we're doing here. When you're okaying projects that take hundreds of thousands of yards to build a development up out of the flood stage, it starts right here. Where's that dirt going to come from? Where's that fill going to come from? Right now, there's hundreds of thousands of yards of material being moved out of the Santa Maria River for housing developments. Right now, there's a project going on where there's moving 50,000 yards of rock to Bakersfield from here and hauling backfill back to here because there's no source. We're 2-block, we're bound up. And this is a tool to get it started, but we need to think of a long-term strategy to make all this work. 100,000 yards, nothing. They're going to move how many yards from Guadalupe to the Santa Maria landfill? And they've already moved that much? You want a few trucks? There's many, many thousands and thousands of trucks running in our county here that why should you have to go all the way across the valley to get material when it's logistically more mature? It meets APCD requirements just to jump from a farmer's field across the road. How many yards do we move from the Bradley over to the homes on this side of the freeway? You know, this is a huge thing. This is bigger than what we're talking about here. And in this we never discussed the exemption for ag operations, and that's why ag's exempt. And in this process, the reclamation portion is farming. When this farmer's done, he's going to farm it. That's the reclamation. It's not like you're going to have a big amphitheater, a big hole in the ground. These guys are moving a feature. And when somebody created this valley, they didn't make all the soil uniform. So we've got some soil types that aren't conducive to farming. And these guys like to pick this stuff up and put it under something else and put the good stuff on top so that they get more heads of lettuce. So we can put it on a truck and send it to LA. But it's, just to let you know, the gravity of this thing is huge, bigger than what we're talking about here. And as we develop more, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. The oil exemption for moving soil is about 3,500 yards. And Larry, you worked on those exemptions years ago with us. And for consistency, you got to make everything work. When it comes to impacts and notice, if anybody knows anything about me, I'm a freak about public notice. I think everything we do should be put in the newspaper for everyone to see. When you're having a project that's going across the valley, is the project where you're digging it, or is it the route? Put it in the newspaper, let everybody know, so that this room can be filled up with people so that they don't get angry later on and say, I wasn't part of the process. I'll be the first one to say it when I'm not. But it's being part of the solution is better than being part of the problem. That's why all of us participated. There were people that had projects in the pipeline to get permitted when this thing got upset by someone doing something that maybe wasn't per the process. So there's been people disenfranchised, and it's a huge process. And I want to thank you for taking the step forward today.
Let me ask you a question. When they do this extraction, do they ever leave undulations that create problems?
No. No. When you're done here today, if you go out Betaravia Road, just past the Y, and look at that soil operation there where they're taking a huge piece of property, a couple of 100 acres. They've been moving dirt for months, and they're putting the less valuable soil in the bottom, putting the best stuff on top, and that'll be some of the most productive ground. It's not by chance. Agriculture is a factory without walls. I'll get killed for saying that, probably thrown out of Farm Bureau, but that's what they do. And it's very competitive, and that's my own illustration. I'll take the bumps when they give them to me.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Gibbons.
Sure.
All right, anybody else? If not, that concludes the public hearing. I close the public hearing and bring it back. Any further comments before we go through our motion? Yeah, Commissioner Boyson.
Well, I guess the only other thing is to decide whether or not the 75,000 cubic yard threshold is appropriate, or not to decide, but to discuss. It sounds to me like the 75,000 yards is as good as any, and that will certainly satisfy the current need. So I guess, yeah, I'm in favor of the number that we've picked out of the air for now. So,
all right. Thank you. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gibbons put it pretty eloquently, or ineloquently. It's not the digging of it, it's the exporting of it that sort of bothers me because we just don't have any certainty about truck trips, intensity of those trips, over what period of time. And I just feel like I don't have enough information. I wish I'd been part of those discussions. It probably would have given me more certainty about the process and the need and the requirement, but I just don't have it from what you presented. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have a motion, or this is a county-wide project? Commissioner Cooney.
Mr. Chair, as we have been presented and will in coming months be presented by suggestions for improvement of our processes, often it's the clash of our increasing the urban environment with our pre-existing agricultural environment that presents these conflicts. It sounds to me like the committee addressed these issues in a very careful fashion. It's probably a compromise that doesn't satisfy anyone totally, but from my review of it, it appears it It is a step in the right direction. It does address a need, and I believe it satisfies what the Board of Supervisors was looking for when it started the process. So I'm going to vote in favor, and I would make the motion that we approve staff's recommendation that we recommend to the Board of Supervisors the item set forth on page 1 of our staff report.
Thank you very much. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyson.
Mr. Chair, before you vote,
Yes.
just the one revision to the notice of exemption, attachment B, that under location it would strike and coastal. So it would
All right.
read the proposed ordinance amendments would apply to all inland areas of the county excluding Montecito planning area.
As amended with attachment D. I'm sure that's meant. All right. Any further discussion? Ms. Mendoza, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Boyson?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
No.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Smizer?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Vote carries 4-1.
All right. With that, we'll go on to item number 3. Are the people here for, we'll take a short 2-minute break to set up for item number 3. Winery Special Event Attendee Limit Ordinance Amendment. Ms. Mendoza, could you read that into the record, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department for the County Planning Commission to consider and make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors regarding the following: 06 ORD 14, and to accept the exemption pursuant to Section 15061B3 of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Thank you, and is asking for ex parte. Are there any wine drinkers here? No? All right, Mr. Langle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the County Planning Commission. Some of you were on the Planning Commission when the new winery permit process and development standards were adopted by the county in July of 2004. This new process divides wineries into 3 tiers, depending on a number of factors, including the area of the planted vineyards, the annual production of the winery, the amount of winery structural development, and the number of special events that may occur at the winery on a yearly basis. Tier 3 wineries, the largest of the wineries allowed under this process, are allowed with the development plan under the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. The number of special events associated with a Tier 3 winery is normally limited to 12 per year. However, this number may be increased through the approval of a conditional use permit by the Planning Commission. The same development standard that limits the number of special events to 12 per year also limits the number of attendees that may be present at each event to 200. However, there is no similar mechanism to increase this number beyond 200 through the CUP process as there is for the number of special events that may be allowed. This was apparently a point of confusion and some misunderstanding when the winery permit process was going through the public hearings before the Planning Commission and the County Board of Supervisors. The amendment before you today would revise the development standard to allow the Planning Commission to increase the number of attendees at special events, again through the approval of a CUP, similar to what already exists for the number of special events. Staff recommends that you follow the procedures outlined in Part 2 of the staff report and recommend to the Board of Supervisors that they adopt the proposed ordinance. Your motion should also include the adoption of the findings included in Attachment A of the staff report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lingle. Commissioner Boyson.
Mr. Langle, thank you very much. And this is very much needed. Appreciate this. This just throws the discretion back in the decision makers' hands and where it should be, and allows some flexibility that these Tier 3 wineries certainly need. My question has to do with what about those wineries that have been approved and have existing CUPs? What process do they need to go through? Are they going to have to come back and amend their CUP, or is that going to be a quick and dirty type thing, or is it going to be a long, involved process for those that already have approved?
CUPs, Tier 3
Mr.
wineries.
Chair and Commissioner Boyson, at this point in time, I don't think any Tier 3 winery has gone through this particular process and has availed themselves of the special event, of the increased number of special events through this conditional use permit. I think you'll find the majority of the existing wineries have gone through a development plan under the old permit structure, the sort of what's been described as one size fits all, where every winery had to go through a development plan under the jurisdiction of your commission, no matter how large or small it was. And during that development plan, typically they specified the number of special events that could occur on the property and attendee limits if that was appropriate. So to the subject of if those wineries wanted to increase the scope beyond what was currently allowed under their own specific development plan, they could avail themselves of that possibility through the new process, either through the CUP if that was a situation that they required due to the number of special events that they requested, or an increase in the number of attendees at those events.
And my question is the process. I mean, are they going to be able to, Ms. Meester, maybe you can, is that going to be something that's going to be pretty simple? Because most of these, when they got their approvals, they were doing it based on the fact that we didn't allow more than 200. But there are certain wineries out there that could certainly handle in addition to 200 and just didn't apply for it because there wasn't that vehicle available to.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Boyson, there's one in particular I can think of that
right, the
I know
Teixeira
was
winery that
was interested in more attendees at their special events. I can't recall, just off the top of my head, what their environmental document reviewed, but I think it reviewed a higher number than 200. If that's the case, I think it'd be a fairly simple matter to come back to the commission and raise that limit, but it would be something that we would bring back to your commission.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any further questions? All right, if not, I'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody here wanting to speak on that item? Seeing no one rise, we'll close it and bring it back to the staff. Any further comments?
Mr.
None?
Chair, I just have a question. What does 200 people at a Tier 3 winery look like in terms of number of cars and that sort of impact? Does anybody have any experience with that?
Well,
I'm just curious.
Sometimes they're in buses.
They're in buses? Is that what happens?
There's a staging area many
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, I've never been to a, I don't know. I just
Mr.
was
Chair,
wondering what that looked like.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, I think it kind of depends on the type of event and the permit conditions that are attached to a winery. In some wineries, there's really very little parking available, and so they do have to have some sort of an off-site location and transport people. In other places, they have lots of area for spillover parking. So it kind of just
We were at the
depends.
Firestone one time, or at that house, and they had people parking the cars, you know.
Yeah,
We went
sometimes they
under
have
the
that.
pole barn, and they handled it very well. I'm sure they had in excess of 200, but there wasn't any problem at all. Commissioner Smizer.
I think it does every winery somewhat different in their approach to guests, but I would agree that there's a substantial amount in the valley anyway, the San Ynez Valley, of carriers that will bring in buses and limos, and so it's not hard to get 200 people at any one of those wineries, even the boutique wineries, on a Saturday or a Sunday, even just for the normal wine tasting. If you add somebody playing music or a special time like the Crush, where people are going to be more interested, or a tour of the winery, I think this is probably well intended and well needed.
You want to stay away from the Crush because you won't drink it if you see how the Crush is.
Lucy and gets out there barefoot and does it.
All right, I have a question, Mr. Langle. It says here on Tier 1 that there's 4 events, special events per year, and I recall we approved a winery over on Alamo Pintado, and it's a small winery, and I'm sure it's a Tier 1, and I know that they had 12 per year, and at the time the commissioner of the 3rd District was trying to drop it down to 6, and we still left it at 12, I think. And this says 4 per year. Is that for new ones?
Mr. Chair, I think you're switching over to the next item, which talks
Oh,
about-
okay. I'm ahead of my project. I pulled my yellow sheet out. All right. All right, let's, can we have a motion? Commissioner Smizer?
Mr. Chair, I would move the staff recommendation.
All right, thank you. Do we have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Ms. Mendoza, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Boyson?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Smizer?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
All right, and we'll just slip on to item number 4, the winery permit process ordinance 661 amendment.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Chair.
Lengle? Yes.
Members of the commission.
Mr. Chair.
segueing-
Oh, we have to read that into the record.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
And then I had a comment I want to make.
All right.
The following is the hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department for the County Planning Commission to consider and make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors regarding 05 ORD 7 and to approve the negative declaration 05 NGD 16 pursuant to the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
All right, thank you very much. And Ms. Black?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I just wanted to explain an issue with this particular item, and I think we have a way to resolve it, but, and I think it's sort of peripheral to the item, but this is another instance where our air quality threshold is getting in the way of something that I think makes a lot of sense. In this particular instance, processing of wine, even at the Tier 1 level, at, I think, I can't remember the number of cases, but at the 20,000 case level, could potentially slightly exceed our 25 pounds per day threshold for reactive hydrocarbons and nitrogen oxide. That's the same issue that came up with that we encountered with the Brightburn Energy Project, and we are moving forward. We've met with the APCD, and we are moving forward to the Board of Supervisors on October 3rd to recommend that they adopt an interim threshold, which would essentially mirror that of the APCDs, which would change that trigger to 55 pounds per day for both vehicle emissions and point source emissions. That will completely take care of the issue in this particular case, but as it stands right now, that threshold change needs to occur for us to be able to proceed with an ND. So Mr. Lengle will explain the substance of this matter, but in terms of process, we're going to recommend that if the commission is comfortable with the rest of the proposal, that you simply recommend that the board approve the final negative declaration with resolution of the air quality issue, because that is really entirely within their purview in terms of the threshold.
All
So
right.
that'll be our recommendation. Noel's going to focus on the substance. I thought I would take heat for that particular glitch in air quality again.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, Mr. Langle, would you proceed?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Segueing into this item from the last one, this is also in regards to the new winery permit process that was adopted by the board in 2004. During that hearing, there were concerns expressed by both members of the public and the board members that due to the large amount of land that remains zoned under Ordinance 661, that many property owners would not be able to take advantage of the new process, especially the smaller wineries that could be permitted as what's known as a Tier 1 winery with a fairly simple land use permit. As a result, the Board of Supervisors directed this department to bring back an amendment to Ordinance 661 that would allow Tier 1 wineries, add Tier 1 wineries to the list of permitted uses within the predominant Ordinance 661 agricultural zones that still exist, they being the limited agriculture zone, the general agricultural zone, and the unlimited agriculture zone, so known as AL, AG, and U, for those of you who are familiar with Ordinance 661. In order to qualify as a Tier 1 winery, the winery must comply with a set of criteria, including that for every 1,000 cases of wine produced per year, there must be at least 2 acres of vineyard planted on the winery premises. The production capacity of the winery is restricted or limited to 20,000 cases per year maximum. There can be no tasting room located on site of a Tier 1 winery. Winery structural development is limited to 20,000 square feet of buildings. and the winery may have up to 4 winery special events per year, with attendance at these special events restricted to 150 attendees per event. Otherwise, the winery is not to be open to the public, does not offer public tours or retail wine sales to the public at large. A negative declaration was prepared to address the potential environmental impacts associated with the project. And as Ms. Black mentioned, during the review of this ND during the public comment period, we ran into a similar situation with the existing environmental threshold for air emissions being potentially, what we felt in the draft ND was that it would not be triggered, but due to some new emission standards that the APCD is now using, the end result was that there is a conclusion that the existing development standard for reactive hydrocarbons would be exceeded by a Tier 1 winery. The Board of Supervisors, as Ms. Black mentioned, is set to review the environmental thresholds on October the 3rd. This particular amendment is not going to the board until October the 24th. Therefore, we hope that the board will act to adjust the threshold appropriately, such that the conclusion of this negative declaration, that is, that there will not be a significant impact to air emissions, can still stand. Thus, staff recommends that your board follow the procedures. Again, in the staff report, you recommend that the board adopt the proposed ordinance. Again, your motion should include the adoption of the findings, including attachment A, and also your motion should include, in regards to recommending that the board approve the negative declaration, the proviso that the board must address the air quality question at the time of adoption of the ordinance amendment as well. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much. I don't know, Commissioner Boyson.
And I guess maybe they've come up with different standards, is that what we're saying? I mean, the 20.45 is no longer applicable in there.
Mr. Chair, just to be very clear, the APCD has a different methodology for calculating emissions from processing of grapes, essentially from that process. The threshold issue really is the issue that came up in the Brightburn case, which was the county has a much more restrictive threshold than the APCD, and what we're trying to do is to conform those standards. So the two combined created this issue in this particular case. We're not going to change the methodology that the APCD uses, but we were already proposing to change that threshold upward to 55.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. So it's the change of information on emissions from wine fermentation aging
that exceeds that 25.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So we used the right threshold, the current threshold in this document, but it slightly exceeds it given their new methodology. And we know we're recommending, and we believe the board will go to the 55 pound per day standard.
Okay. Any further questions? All right, at this time I'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody here who'd like to speak on this item? Seeing everybody arise, we'll close the public hearing. We'll bring it back to the commission. What's the wish of the commission? Can we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we adopt the staff recommendation with the proviso that this be the issue of the air quality emission be provisional. In other words, that if and only if a agreement is reached with the APCD and our standards.
Thank you, Commissioner Smizer. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Oops, careful. Ms. Mendoza, could you read that into the record, please?
Commissioner Boyson?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Smizer?
Yes.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
All right, thank you. And that concludes that item. We'll go on to item number 5. And we're all ready to go. Item number 5 is the fiscal year 2005-2006 General Plan Amendment Report by Mr. John McManus. Ms. Mendoza, could you read that into the record, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of the Comprehensive Planning Division to review the Santa Barbara County General Plan Annual Report for fiscal year 2005-2006, file the report with the Board of Supervisors and forward it to the State Office of Planning and Research and the Department of Housing and Community Development.
All right, Mr. McInnes.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, thank you. What's before you today, do we have our PowerPoint? Okay. What's before you today is our annual report. You saw this, have seen this over the last several years. We can go to the next slide. It is an annual report that's mandated by the state government code. It's required to include a status of the general plan and progress and implementation, progress in meeting regional housing needs, and the county's efforts to remove governmental constraints to housing. The government code requires that we submit this general report, this annual report, to the legislative body, which is our Board of Supervisors, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, OPR, and the State Department of Housing and Community Development, State HCD. As you might have been able to tell from the annual report, the purpose is to report on the status of the county's general plan, to provide an overview or an update on the implementation of the general plan, and then finally progress that we've been making as a county on meeting our regional housing needs. By way of the status of the general plan and the amendments that are adopted or underway currently, and certainly you're aware of most, if not all of these, we are working on updating our housing element. We are also engaged in updating the agricultural preserve uniform rules. We are working on a Ordinance 661 consistency rezone for a portion of the county. The Santa Ynez Community Plan is under development. In fact, we have a hearing this evening in Santa Ynez. Subcommittee of the Board of Supervisors will be holding that hearing. We're also in the process, or will be updating the Goleta Community Plan. We've been working on a visioning process there in preparation for that community plan update process. And then the Isla Vista Master Plan is under development and, in fact, under environmental review. As far as implementation efforts that are discussed in the annual report and that are ongoing or completed, we recently have been working on the Orchid Community Plan implementation, several items there. The Goleta Residential Design Guidelines will be before your commission by the end of this calendar year. We also are engaged in regional planning work, primarily through participation in various technical advisory committees and municipal service and annexation reviews. So that's an ongoing function that we provide. And then we also work closely with the Development Review Division of P&D on major projects to ensure that new projects are consistent with the general plan. If there's consistency determinations that need to be made, we work with DevRev to provide a joint recommendation there. So just in summary, this also, I guess I should say that our 3-year work program is included as attachment to this annual plan, and reports on the changes to the comprehensive plan that we foresee this year and into the next 2 years. And that's, as you know, and as we've reported to you when we brought that to you in the past, that is the opportunity really to take a look at what do we need to do into the future to make sure that we're updating our general plan in a manner that meets our needs and state laws, et cetera. So as far as the next steps, the requirements of this annual report are that the county receive and review the general plan annual report, or that you receive it and file it. We file it with the Board of Supervisors, and that we also forward it, as I said, to the state OPR and state HCD. So again, the state requirement, annual report. Hopefully there isn't anything in this report that should come as a surprise to you as far as what we're working on, to update the general plan. And that concludes my presentations. I would like to make one minor point, and that is in the annual report there was some general introductory language describing your commission and the appointment of your commission, and I had some minor clarification. That would be on page 1 of the annual report. The first paragraph under purpose of annual report, and the last sentence talks about, is referencing the your commission and how it's appointed. And I would suggest that we make some minor modifications to that sentence just to clarify that, in fact, the Board of Supervisors approves the appointment of the membership on the commission. So just to be clear on that. So with that, I have no further comments and be happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions? All right, at this time, we'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody here who wishes to speak on this item? Seeing no one rise, we'll bring it back to the staff. Does the staff have any further comments? No? Bring it back to the commission. What's the wishes of the commission? Move for approval? Commissioner Smizer.
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the report from staff.
And file with the Board of Supervisors and the State Department. All right, thank you. Is there a second?
Yeah, did we want to clarify the language before? Or I think that's clarified. I think if we just insert the word appointed by the Board of Supervisors.
Actually, we're nominated by the district and we're appointed by the board.
Very good. We'll make that
Just
change specifically, yeah.
And I'll second that.
All right, thank you very much. Any further discussion? Commissioner Smizer?
I'm sorry, my button's on, but I'm
You're ready to
obviously
vote?
not. I'm ready to vote.
Ms. Mendoza, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Boyson?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Smizer?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
And with that, the Planning Commission has concluded its work for today. At the next meeting will be Tuesday here in Santa Maria. Most of the items will be in the 3rd District, so Commissioner Smizer, get a good rest because you're going to get a good work over. This meeting is adjourned.